I see a note, this meeting is being recorded. So if everyone else sees that, that's so we can have a great record of this as well and remember what we all say and do on this big screen. Good morning again, everybody. We're very happy to be starting on day 2 of the 4-day session of the GEF Introduction Seminar. Today we will continue our journey through the GEF together. Yesterday, as we talked a little bit about, we started this journey. We talked about the different aspects of the GEF, what we do. This is an introduction. We started on the programming work, the policy work, the operations work, a little bit how we do our work. That's a piece that we started yesterday, the who we are. So we're starting to introduce ourselves to the different parts of the partnership. And as we go through each session, as I mentioned, we want to talk about why we are doing this particular thing and how it relates to the big picture why of what we're all about in the GEF. We also had an introduction from William of our origin story and the vision from the CEO. So it was a great pleasure, and thank you very much for the great questions yesterday. I was reflecting on these questions about who and what and why of the GEF. I was thinking there's also this question of where. Not exactly in the physical sense, but the question of where we are now. So we're taking stock of where we are and where we're going. And this is looking ahead to the future. So let us keep in mind today and the next couple of days also this question of where. So let us continue now. We have a full agenda, and so I'd like to have us dive straight in. You might have seen on the agenda yesterday that there was embedded into the afternoon, or well, into the late morning session, another quick quiz, or another quiz that relates to programming. And so we actually, given how everything was flowing, we decided to put that at the top of the morning and the afternoon and the evening today. And this has to do with not the big quiz that William started us out with, but another quiz that Susan is going to lead us into. And this is going to help introduce us to our first topic of this morning, which will be after the quiz, the private sector engagement, which is a kind of a continuation of the programming discussion we had yesterday. So if I may, Susan, if the systems are ready, may I turn it over to you to help us, shake us up in the beginning of the session and see if we've done our homework.
Yes. Good morning, and thank you, Peter. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. It's great to see all of you. And we do have a very short quiz. And if you could put it up.
And while they're doing that, let me just introduce Susan. Susan is a lead in the Secretariat on much of the work of our country support program. I'm sure many of you know her or may know her, and here's and get to know her through this quiz. Susan, please, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, thank you, Peter. So this quiz, for those of you, many of you who are coming back, welcome back. Those who are joining us afresh, you're very welcome. And this quiz will serve as actually a little bit of a revision from yesterday. So let's go straight into the first question. Which of the following focal areas is not currently under the STAR system? And the second question, which conventions are funded by GEF through the chemicals and waste focal areas?
Hold on, we got a problem with the polling here. I'm gonna close this down here.
You want us to start again, Ted?
Yeah, sorry, something just...
Okay, we'll just quickly go through it again. Question number 1, which of the following focal areas is not currently under the STAR system? Question number 2, which conventions are funded by GEF through the chemicals and waste focal area?
Susan, let me just say, I see on the chat, traducir las opciones, which I think is a question about the interpretation. There should be interpretation at the bottom button in the screen. But yeah, Susan, if you can, when you say the question, hopefully the interpreters will put it into the other languages. So please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. And question number 3, which government official must endorse a PIF, project identification form, for submission to the GEF Secretariat?
And Susan, I think what they're asking is that you read the potential answers so that those are interpreted.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that.
That is correct. That's what they want. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'll just quickly go through that then. For question number 1, which of the following focal areas is not currently under the STAR system? Biodiversity, international waters, climate change, or land degradation? For question number 2, which conventions are funded by GEF through the chemicals and waste focal area? A is the Stockholm Minamata Conventions and the Montreal Protocol. B is A plus the Basel Convention. And C is A plus the Rotterdam Convention. And D is all of the above. And question number 3, which government official must endorse a PIF for submission to the GEF Secretariat? A is the GEF political focal point. Second is the GEF operational focal point. Third is the convention focal point. Fourth, the Minister of Finance. And fifth, the Minister of Environment. Those are the 3 questions. And I will now go through we can all see the results. So the results, majority of the results are in orange. And the correct response is in orange. And as you can see, everyone seems to have been listening very keenly yesterday. So for the first question, which of the following focal areas is not currently under the STAR system? I think we heard that from the presenters yesterday, and the correct answer is international waters. The STAR system, as we heard from Naing, covers biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation. So great, everybody, 87% got the correct answer. For the second question, which conventions are funded by GEF through the chemicals and waste focal area? The correct answer is A, the Stockholm Minamata Conventions and the Montreal Protocols. As you all know, the GEF is a financial mechanism for the various conventions, and the GEF supports the implementation of the Montreal Protocol for countries with economies in transition to phase out their use of ozone depleting chemicals. So that was the correct answer. And number 3, which government official must endorse a PIF for submission to the GEF Secretariat? And again, the correct answer, which 76% of you got, is the GEF operational focal point. And just to confirm that no project will be accepted or submitted without endorsement from the GEF operational focal point, and this person is designated by the government. So thank you, Peter. I think we all did very well, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I saw in the chat that the quiz may have been flashing in and out for a number of folks on the screen, so we did remarkably well, with a little bit of the technical challenges there. But I see, the 3 questions, Susan did read them. I hope you could at least get it through the reading if the quiz disappeared on you. It was about what's not covered by the STAR, focal areas, which conventions are funded through chemicals and waste was the second question. And then which government official must endorse a PIF before submission to the GEF Secretariat? And that, of course, is the GEF operational focal point. Very high percentage of correct answers. Okay, thank you very much. I think, like the quiz yesterday, we'll find a way to share this so that even if there were some technical difficulties in the seeing of it, we will have it going forward as a refresher, as part of the understanding of how our programming works and the process of the STAR and the role of the operational focal points. So I see in my screen in the upper left-hand corner, Matthew. Are you there, Matthew? Yes, excellent. All right. Matthew is in our programming office. Susan is in the policy and operations office. Matthew is our lead person on private sector engagement. And as you can see from the, let's see, this topic, maybe I should ask Claude if you would like to introduce this first. I see Claude, your name, the private sector engagement and blended finance, or if Matthew, you would like to simply take it away.
If anybody should introduce, it should be Gustavo, but I'll leave it up to
Gustavo, are you there? Would you like to say a couple of opening words?
Well, I think we should go straight into that. We only have 45 minutes to
Very
cover
good.
private sector engagement and LDCF, SCCF. So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. So Matthew, you're on.
And let me just say, this is the first time Gustavo has taken the floor. He's our director of the programming office, the counterpart of Francoise, who's the director of the policy and operations office. So Matthew, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Gustavo. And what a delight it is to present to so many people who are new and joining the GEF. So marvelous to have this opportunity to talk with you today about this very important topic of private sector engagement. So the GEF has a history, a good history of working with the private sector. And this has been developed over many years through a variety of instruments. Avril Benjamin, my colleague, will be talking in the next presentation about the blended finance, the non-grant instrument. And in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about how we are trying to build the private sector more fully and mainstreamed into the GEF programming and into the delivery of global environmental benefits right across the portfolio under the theme of systems change and systems transformation. So I think that's one key thing we'd like to identify here. In the 59th GEF Council meeting, we had the private sector engagement strategy approved. In addition to the engagement strategy, we also have an implementation plan and some guidelines on how we will be working with the private sector, including the way in which we work with countries and indeed with our implementing agencies. Next slide, please. So the vision, we have a vision for private sector engagement. Why do we want to engage the private sector? So we recognise that across the major economic systems, if we are going to have a transformation to really move towards those systems that are sustainable and do not contribute to environmental degradation, then we really must work with the private sector at scale. And our vision is for the GEF to work with the private sector so that the private sector can bring the unique things that they have, which is the ability to finance, to influence supply chains, to collaborate and bring innovation. And through that, we expect to have greater speed and enhanced scale, both geographic scale for projects and scale of impact through our private sector work. And indeed, this concept of durability, so that when we have investments that go into countries and into focal areas, that they indeed outlive and are working beyond the timeframes that are specified within any project, for example. So that's our vision, to make things bigger, faster, and more durable. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we have the engagement strategy focused on what we call core elements. These are three areas in which we'll focus our activities. The first, building on this concept of systemic transformation, we're going to face systems change, and through this we'll be working with multi-stakeholder platforms. So instead of working bilaterally with a single entity, a single company, for example. We'll be working with all of those companies that have an interest in a value chain or a specific outcome, such as greenhouse gas emissions reductions, resilience, or indeed reductions in harmful chemicals. So this idea, and the question came up yesterday, in fact, how do we propose to work with land management? And the idea is that we work through value chains and multi-stakeholder platforms that can bring the scale that we need to systemic transformation. That's the first point. I'll make the next point, which is that for the GEF, the private sector is a very, it's a broad term, but for the GEF, it's all encompassing. So unlike many strategies that you might see that focus perhaps on smallholders or multinational corporations, when we work at the level of systems transformation, that necessarily brings in all of the actors within any given value chain. So we'll be working with the smallholders, MSMEs, government-owned business enterprises, so state-owned corporations, right the way through to multinational entities as well. And we haven't excluded, and sometimes this can be quite catalytic, those foundations and funds that are set up by the private sector and can contribute to the work of the GEF. So a very broad term for us when we consider the private sector. And we indeed therefore need to have multiple entry points for the private sector if indeed we are to make sure that we encompass the value chain. So our entry points might include things like new programs for biodiversity initiatives, standard settings at the geographic level, at the local level, at the national, and indeed the regional level. And I think this is one of the areas that perhaps will form more of a discussion point as we go forward. The third point is what we do internally within the GEF partnership to really make sure we have a strong platform for private sector collaboration. And here we call that our internal orientation. So being more organised about the way we record, manage and report private sector engagement, the opportunities that we can provide within the partnership and the collaboration that we can foster within and between the agencies, the GEFSEC, and importantly, the countries themselves. So those are the three pillars. And of course, a very important aspect of this, and it cuts right across, is the knowledge management within the GEF partnership and the learnings that we can derive from working with the private sector. Next slide, please. Now, how does this all work? So I've put together this, I've called it a narrative, essentially. So if we read this chart from left to right, we consider the work, as I explained, with our private sector actors, working not in a transactional way, but with our partners. First and foremost, this is the GEF agencies. So the private sector working with GEF agencies, all levels of government, and indeed other entities, research and development, for example, through what we call engagement modalities. So you'll be familiar with finance. People often think of the contribution that the private sector can make financially. And so that's a very important point. And Avril will be talking about some of the innovations and developments we have in our finance engagement modality. But we also recognise that the private sector can contribute a lot more. So we're looking here at things like capacity development, technical assistance, the policy development. And policy, of course, there are indeed private sector policies, such as policies on reporting and disclosure, policies such as zero deforestation commitments, and the types of industry leadership that we see that we think can engage and drive some of the sectors to have a higher level of ambition in what they would like to achieve. And so working through these engagement modalities into the GEF portfolio of projects and programs, we will then expect to achieve global environmental benefits, as I explained in the vision, that can be delivered faster, at a larger scale, that are more durable, and we hope can be done more efficiently using the private sector. So that's an overview of how we think we should be working to support our engagements. Next slide, please. So why does the private sector want to get involved? And let's talk a little bit about this systemic transformation. And in the next slide, I'm going to come to this question of, as Peter explained in his introduction, where? So a couple of years ago, 2017, the Business and Sustainable Development Commission launched a report about what's the economic opportunity of realizing some of these sustainable development goals. And they looked at this across the big four economic systems: energy and materials, which obviously includes climate change, food and agriculture, cities, transport, urban mobility, and health and well-being. And they identified that there are huge economic opportunities for business to be sustainable in these systems for job creation. And it moves away from this whole concept that sustainability is a cost to business, but rather is a business opportunity. And if you read that report, they have identified a range of investment opportunities that can really drive some of these systemic transformations. And indeed, there are regionalized reports based on the global report. So I would encourage you to take a look at that in thinking about some of the priorities for business. But what's interesting is on the next slide, and that's where these opportunities are distributed. So when we look at how investments in food and agriculture and how investments in the cities, if we can go to the next slide, this tells you where these are available. And quite clearly, vast opportunities exist for business to invest in our recipient countries. So I think this is a key point here, that GEF is working through GEF 7 and of course into GEF 8 and 9 through these major economic systems, and that we will be working with business to drive these changes in these key areas. So I think we're coming up to almost 10 minutes here. So I know there are a lot of questions. I've put some other slides together. I won't present them now, and I'll leave some time for us to have some questions and think about some of these ideas of systems change and the broad role of business. And I'll pass to my colleague, Avril Benchamal, to talk about the blended finance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Let me just come in to introduce Avril. She is also in the GEF Secretariat, and she is our lead on the topic you see on the screen, which is blended finance and non-grant instruments. And so she'll walk us through that part of the whole private sector blended finance discussion. I do see questions coming in about the presentations. Matthew mentioned there are other slides. The presentations will be put up on the website. Thanks so much, Matthew. Avril, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Avril Benchamal, as Peter and Matthew mentioned. I am the lead of the Blended Finance or Non-Grant Instrument Program. Please, next slide.
Avril, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can hear a very echo behind you. Yeah.
Is that all right? Is that better?
I'm not sure. I
Yes,
still hear
that's
it, but
great,
let's try.
Avril.
Yeah, I
Can
think
hear
it's okay.
perfectly.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, great. So we have 10 minutes to basically cover a very interesting initiative inside the GEF here. But what I want to cover first is the basics. So we'll go through what is blended finance, and then we'll go over how we're doing the business of blended finance here at the GEF, our experience, our goal, and the competitive process to select the project. Next slide, please. So what is blended finance? So for many of you, this might be a new concept. And here what I wanted to bring to your attention is that basically blended finance is a tool. It's the use of concessional finance, meaning finance at better terms than the market, in projects where actual or perceived risks are too high for commercial finance alone. So if you look here at the graph, what you can see is that basically, whenever there is an asset with a financial performance or a project or a company If you're fully creditworthy, so things are going great, you can go to any bank and you can get commercial finance without the support of a third actor. However, when we enter into the more orange area, when we have unproven track records for some of the investments that we have in the environmental arena, or even loss making, that's where you can see on the dark blue box that we need grants and subsidies. Blended finance basically sits in between what is fully commercially financeable and the grants and subsidies. And the way we basically support at the GEF the projects that come in this financing gap is with what we call non-grant instruments, as opposed to the main product of the GEF, which is grants. The non-grant instruments include I would say three major categories, which are debt, guarantees, and equity. So debt would be whatever like kind of a loan or or bonds that can be basically used in favorable terms in terms of subordination or longer maturities beyond what is used in the market for certain projects. And then we have guarantees, which provides first losses, or equity, which provides ownership in a company, and the GEF can take a higher risk in that respect. Next slide, please. So in our history, as you can see, and now after a day of training, you know that we've been around for quite a long time, so since 1992. And here, when we look at the GEF cycles, what we see is that we've been using non-grant instruments almost since inception. However, the composition, and here I want to bring your attention to the colors of the different focal areas in which our investments take place. Initially, in the early cycles, we started with almost all of the investment being in climate change. And as we move along and as the new environmental areas become important for the private sector, we see much more investment in land degradation, biodiversity, and chemicals and waste. So specifically in the last, I would say 8 years, we started in GEF 6 with a specific set aside, so a specific pot of money to attract private sector investment to the mission, the core areas of the GEF, to these different focal areas. And in GEF 6, we were very successful with 99.5 million in that set aside, so specific money that is not inside the star allocation. And we attracted $1.79 billion, which is a very high co-financing ratio of 1 in 17. Currently, we are in GEF 7, and we got $136 million to be allocated. This is what you see in the last bar. And we have so far allocated almost 110 million with a co-financing of 1 in 14. What can we say? So through this call for proposals, we get a lot of information from our agencies and the interest of the private sector to invest in these areas. And we can see that there's a lot of interest, even much more than money that we have available. So far, in 3 calls for proposals, we have received 28 projects for more than 400 million, although, as I said before, we only have 136 million left. Next slide, please. Here, we wanted to share with you a bit of the composition of what these non-grant instruments have been supported throughout history. And you can see that by financial product, as I mentioned before, debt, equity, and guarantees, in the early cycles, we had much more of revolving funds and much more of debt type instruments or first loss instruments like guarantees, what we call risk, taking the risk. As we move closer to today, we see much more participation of equity investments and also a mixture of products. By region, we have always supported, as you know, we support the whole developing world, but we initially started being with global projects, and then we went to regional projects with, as you see, Africa and a lot of Latin America and the Caribbean. And in this last cycle, we've turned again back to global projects. Next slide, please. In the current GEF7 cycle portfolio so far, so we are more than, well, I would say the third year of this cycle, we have selected out of these 28 projects, 8 that I mentioned before. We have received 28 projects and we've selected 8 with a co-financing ratio of 1 in 14.8, which is still very high, a bit less than what we had in GEF6, but still very high when compared to other windows of financing of the GEF. And what we wanted to here share with you is, again, that by financial product, equity continues to be or is, again, a very demanded product. This is because we take more risks as an equity investor. And what's very important of these 4 pies, I would bring your attention to the bottom left-hand side focal area funding amount. Why? Because what we see lately is that most of the projects that we receive are focusing on multifocal area, meaning not only one specific area that we support that you learned yesterday about land degradation or biodiversity or climate change, but we're breaking the silos and we are receiving a lot of proposals that invest in multiple areas and that receive revenues and streams of revenues from these very different areas of investments in the environment. Next slide, please. So what's our goal with our blended finance initiative? What you can see in this slide is that I'm using here the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that are basically our way to align with what most of the private sector investors care about when trying to label their investments. So we're coming from, as I mentioned, in the early years of the GEF and even in the last decade, a lot of investment in climate action, so climate change mitigation, and affordable and clean energy, which is SDGs 13 and 7. But the challenge is really going to investments in biodiversity, land degradation, international waters, and chemicals and waste. And these are the SDGs 15, 14, and 13 on the adaptation side, and 12. So what the goal of the GEF is basically take the very innovative action to invest in projects that can transform industry, can create financial products, and test new asset classes. And to do that, we actually take quite a lot of risk in our projects. Next slide, please. And to give you an example of the types of projects we invest in, here I have selected only some very specific transactions that we had in GEF6 and in GEF7. For example, in GEF6, we supported the Seychelles Blue Bond, which is what you have here with the SDG 14 Life Below Water. And in there, we helped the Seychelles issued its first blue bond that will protect certain marine areas and coral reefs. And in GEF7, in this current cycle, for example, we have supported a wildlife conservation bond, and that is what we call here at home at the GEF the rhino bond, because if successful, that bond will pay coupons to investors only if the rhino population increases in 2 parks of South Africa. This would be a very innovative transaction, and we are working to issue this bond hopefully in the second quarter of this year with the World Bank Group. We also worked in a green shipping initiative to reduce the pollution in this very challenging industry. And I just also used the example of the Circular Economy Initiative, which is a project that seeks to really transform industries in Eastern Europe and Eastern Asia to basically change the way business is done into a more circular path. Next slide, please. So how do we select our projects? You learned yesterday quite a lot about the star allocation, and if you didn't do it today, yesterday, you still do it today about what's the program and project cycle. There's nothing really different for the non-grant instrument initiative or the blended finance. We follow the same GEF project and program cycle policy and guidelines. That's why all the presentations from PPO, our colleagues, are so important. It is very important that all of our projects comply with the programming directions that were established in GEF 7, that I'm sure you're also learning all about. But what is different is that actually we undergo a competitive process to select projects. So that's a bit different from the star allocation because there's a lot of competition, and we get a lot of information from the countries, the agencies, and the interest from the private sector through this selection modality. We have the support of an advisory group of financial experts. They are external, and they just basically help us see perhaps things that at the Secretariat we might just not be in contact with a pure financial world, and they work with us in a non-binding and pro bono basis. And there is a detailed term sheet that is compared across all the projects. And that term sheet is not something that, for example, projects in the star allocation would submit. And this is basically to evaluate the financial aspects of the proposals. On the timeline, we have the more or less the same deadlines or final deadlines for PIF submission. But since we have the call for proposals, we basically need to start earlier and open the call worldwide and wait for keep it open for 2 months, and then close it so that we receive all the projects. So that right now we are in the 4th call for proposals. We're closing that call for proposals in 2 days on Thursday. So we'll know more about new projects coming for the hopefully the June Council. Next slide, please. These are very quickly the selection criteria. We can share with you in the call for proposals, but also in this presentation. Basically, what we look at is not only, and that I can't stress that enough, the blended finance is just a tool, an additional tool that the GEF Secretariat has to support the same goals that the GEF basically has in its mission. So we have the selection criteria on scalability, attractive financial terms, innovation and project execution, but the GEF 7 programming directions and the capacity of the projects to basically produce global environmental benefits and the core indicators that Cyril was mentioning yesterday in his presentation is key. And I think with this, we are done, and we can open for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much, Avril. Thank you, Matthew. I see some nice appreciation to both of you on the chat line. So thanks for those very nice and informative presentations. Like yesterday, I'll turn over to William to help us navigate through questions. Remember, the best way to get a question is email to William, but William is also checking in case there's something on the chat. So William, please.
Thank you very much. We've been answering some of the questions online, but there's one that says, so does it mean that all NGIs are achieved through private sector execution?
Thank you. So the whole goal of the non-grant instrument is basically help attract private sector investment into the areas that the GEF invests in. That usually, can mean that it's executed by the private sector, but not only. As long as we can have, for example, a more public entity executing, but as long as it attracts private sector co-financing and benefits the private sector, it could be eligible.
Thank you. What kind of incentive mechanisms work well with the private sector in practical terms? Which benefits do they receive? Are there any risks that you foresee in working with private sector in natural resources management?
I can start with that and see if Matthew then has something to add. So the incentive mechanisms at the end of the day for any private sector company we talk to is that they need risk and return profiles that can be acceptable for them. So if the financing that we bring, when it's combined to theirs, helps them achieve that risk and return profile, that's their incentive. On the other side, by getting a GEF project, you're really sure that you're getting the environmental impact that you're looking for. Matthew, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yes, thank you for a great question. I think, what is the private sector looking for? I think it's a key point. And let me talk briefly to that question about the benefits to the private sector. So the private sector is already investing quite considerably into their value chains. They're making huge commitments, as you see, with these net zero by certain dates. Usually that's 2050. And we also see this year, the super year for nature. Perhaps it was a super year for nature, but not in the way we expected. That there's going to be a huge investment in biodiversity. Never have we seen such a business interest in biodiversity. So the COP15 CBD, the post 2020 framework is going to be guiding business into their investments. So the benefits that business wants to see is against their own performance metrics and criteria in sustainability, to de-risk their value chains, and to attract the kind of investment that you see from companies like BlackRock, who have made very strong messaging into the marketplace about those businesses that they will fund and those businesses that they won't fund, and indeed favourable terms from banks and financial institutions that support biodiversity, that support climate change mitigation, adaptation, and generally reduce risk. And I think that's another key area for the business community, is by investing into sustainability, there's a huge risk reduction and business opportunities. Those reports that I highlighted there, you have a look at those, and I think you can quite clearly see many of those are absolutely of direct relevance to the GEF, and the top three in each of those categories are very much prominent in the GEF programming directions. One point I would like to make, because of the presence of our country partners on the call, is the private sector looks to the GEF as a bridge between governments and making their investments into nature. So this opportunity, which is unique to the GEF, to work with the public sector, to work with the ministries, is something that the private sector is looking for GEF to help them with. So this is a very key point. I'd like to emphasize this PPP approach and opportunities that we can provide to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
William, this is Carlos Manuel.
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matthew and Abril. Also, I would like to complement to what you were saying in terms of, how do we see our role in the future with private sector, because Abril has been, briefing us very well on blended finance, on the grant, on non-grant instrument, and Matthew has been telling us about the strategy that we have. But also in the future, we need to be able to work with governments, so governments can really create the right policy frameworks for the private sector to engage in the transition in terms of best practices and diminishing their footprint and changing their consumption model and production pattern. So these new frameworks and these policies should be seen from the positive side, creating positive incentives so they can be rewarded by the market as they do better. But on the other side, and this is very important, governments need to address the negative externalities from the private sector. The private sector generates pollution, and that pollution is not reflected in the air production costs. It's socialized. It goes down the river. It goes down to the next generation. So as the UN General Secretary said last week, we need to shift the tax burden from taxpayers to polluters. So if we help countries understand how they can level up the economic playing field so the private sector can use the right market sign. It will be fabulous and great. So using the market and by internalizing positive and negative externalities will avoid depending on the direct regulation that we normally use to deal with pollution. And here's where we will have a potential to really scale up the role of private sector. So private sector, my point here, private sector, we don't see the private sector as just a financial possibility to work with them. We don't see the private sector just as a way to finance sustainability, but most importantly, we see the private sector as a big challenge that we need to work with government by creating the right policies by which it will be economically attractive to the private sector to do the system change needed. Thank you so much.
Okay, let me go to another few questions that
And William, let us conclude with these last few, this last
Okay.
round. Thanks, yeah.
Very good. So last round, could you expand a bit more on the incentives for private sector involvement when financial opportunities and or returns are not evident or at best are indirect, for example, in biodiversity? Are there ways in which the GEF can provide recognition to responsible business? Second, could you explain a little bit about public-private partnership? Third, what kind of documentation is expected for these apart from co-financing letter? Will it require GEF OFB endorsement letter? Does the private sector need to submit this directly to the focal point in the country? And finally, will blended finance have financing for COVID-19 and post-COVID-19? Thank you.
Okay, I think I can start with some of the answers, and I'll try to be a bit quick. So on the public-private partnerships, whenever there's a possibility or a project that brings in a PPP, as we call it, we can finance that as long as, again, the call for proposals and the project follows the call for proposals directions and the selection complies with the eligibility criteria and selection criteria. And on the challenging investments in areas like biodiversity and what can we do, that's basically all we try to focus on here at the non-grant instrument initiative, because this is precisely what we need to try to create a track record for those very challenging areas. So what the GEF basically provides is a type of financing that can be very risky to allow for innovation, and perhaps that means that as long as a project has a great impact on biodiversity terms, we can go into great risk and perhaps not get our monies back. And for us, the whole point is to make the case for investment in these very frontier areas. As for the COVID and post-COVID-19, we have the whole portfolio of the GEF is now taking COVID-19 considerations, and I don't know if maybe Gustavo would like to talk about that. And as for the, I believe I think I'm missing one of the questions, but maybe I'll give the word to Gustavo or Matthew to help me out on the other ones.
Yes, please, Gustavo, Matthew, please, yeah.
Matthew, why don't you complement Avril's question, and then I can come back to COVID.
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, everyone. I think the question again is this one around, what are the benefits that come to the private sector? And I guess this question often arises, if they're not receiving direct financial benefit from a project, or, why would they be interested in that? Well, there's a number of those, and that's that business recognizes there's no future for them on a dead planet. They're dependent upon nature in so many of their value chains and in so much of their production and systems that they need to have functioning ecosystems, otherwise they won't have a business. So it's in their vested interests to invest in nature. On the other side, they have shareholders, they have customers, and you can see the immense damage that can be caused by two brands and two businesses if they don't comply with at least the minimum standards, but of course the opportunities that can be derived from demonstrating their achievements in sustainability will accrue to them in a number of areas. And you can see that through the COVID-19 crisis, the pandemic rather, many of those businesses that were more sustainable were more profitable. Those organisations that had good profiles in terms of their social ESG, environmental and social governance, I mean, they were outperforming those companies and stocks that didn't have ESG or a sustainability focus. And, you know, for example, in renewable energy during this one period, we've seen the price of oil absolutely tank. But at the same time, if you'd have invested in renewable energy companies, you might have even doubled or tripled your money. So the opportunities to invest and work towards sustainability are themselves in the rewards, and we don't necessarily see the projects or the way to work through projects as always being a direct financial benefit to companies, but often they will have flow-on effects, indirect effects, and can help business meet many of their targets. So you'll see things like the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and that will now be augmented with another scheme, another approach called TNFD, the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And that's so that the finance sector, investors and banks, can make sure that they're investing in companies that are nature positive and not nature negative. So those are the sorts of drivers that are shifting and helping transform systems and demonstrating that is in the business interest. Thank you.
Remember also, Gustavo, while you answer, perhaps the role of the operational focal point was asked in 2 questions.
Right. Okay. On COVID-19, I think Carlos Manuel spoke about this a few times already, but let me draw us back to the point when last year it became clear that we had a pandemic to face and that it would last for quite a while. And the consequences to the GEF and its portfolio, both the existing one as well as the ones that would be coming for council approval via the countries and agencies would necessarily be affected. We initiated a process of consultation with a GEF COVID-19 task force, response task force that is made up of individuals from different organizations that could add to the expertise available to the GEF Secretariat to think through the consequences and also the opportunities in certain cases for the GEF to be more helpful in that space. And there is a very well elaborated document on this that we can make available. The link is in the GEF website, but we can perhaps point to you, which is the GEF's response to COVID-19 white paper, and you can find it in the website. And there you're going to see all the pointers to aspects that the GEF could be helpful, both at this stage as well as in the phase related to a green and blue recovery or building back better. And that's where I think we need to discuss the role of the private sector, because as you have seen, there's going to be a huge infusion of both public and private capital in the efforts to recover from the pandemic, particularly in the areas of infrastructure, job generation, in terms of the profile of new businesses or businesses that already exist but need to adjust to the fact that COVID-19 is a direct byproduct of our failure to take nature into consideration when we address our economies, when we address how we function as a society and as a global system. So that's where I think we need to really play a significant role in helping to chart the pathways towards a greener recovery, because there is also a risk that we might not see a green recovery, but perhaps a brown pathway that is not necessarily the one that we should be addressing. That's why it's so timely to have a private sector engagement strategy that's backed by the GEF Council and approved recently that Matthew described, as well as a robust window on blended finance that can start to attract significant amounts of funding from commercial investors, so that we can try to make whatever that's possible nature also reflect its potential to generate not only financial benefits, but also benefits for across the different focal areas of the GEF, across the different dimensions of the GEF. So that's why it's so important now, and perhaps even more than before the pandemic, that we look at these connections with the private sector and to the ways it functions. And Matthew already mentioned the work that we are doing with the Financial Disclosure for Nature, the Task Force on Financial Disclosure for Nature. That's also another way to look into how we can help companies green their operations, even downstream from their own business, but also across their supply chains and also through their sourcing of materials, so that we can have a greener recovery. On the documentation that was asked, the question, we have, I would also ask Avril to put a link to the call for proposals that we've been issuing, because there's a very detailed account of all the documentation that's needed, all the criteria that we follow when we review projects that come via the agencies to us with private sector proposals. And there you see when, in what circumstances, letters of endorsements from focal points are needed, when they are not, and all the details on that. And if you have additional questions later on in this process and this week, we can address them, because it's a very comprehensive set of documentation that you need to go through that. So I'll stop here. Back to you, Peter.
Yes, and may I just, before you go back to Peter, we forgot to say, aside from the call for proposals, there's a guide for understanding and applying for blended finance that is in our website, and I'm sending the link with that will answer all of your questions on the more operational side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Avril. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much, Gustavo, too, for coming in on that. Thanks to all for lots of great questions and discussion. As you can tell, in a sense, this is a very high priority area of work for the GEF. We have a new strategy. Matthew has led that. We have the new window for blended finance. Avril is in the lead. I love what Matthew said. It's in everyone's interest, the private sector too, that we pursue these new modalities and opportunities, getting to drivers and externalities, seeing if we can get traction on this. And as Carlos Manuel said, the importance of the enabling environment and dealing with the externalities. So big area of work and opportunity for the GEF and the partnership. Let us keep going. We'll adjust the time as we keep going forward to make sure we have enough time now, Chiz, for this very important topic, which is to talk about the climate change adaptation work, the LDCF and SCCF. Chiz is our lead in the GEF Secretariat on a couple of big things. One is the relationships with all of our conventions. She coordinates that work, and she also is the lead of the team on climate change adaptation. Looks to me like we're going to have another quiz, Chiz, if that's right. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Peter. Good morning, good afternoon, evening. As introduced, my name is Chizuraki. I'm happy to discuss the GEF's climate adaptation program here, and 2 days later, I guess on Thursday, I'll come back and talk about the conventions. Look, I only have 20 minutes. That's not a lot of time, but collectively, it's a lot of time. I think there is, 460 people? So 20 minutes of 460 people is over 150 hours. So I want to make sure we're using that very well. So why don't we start the session with a very short polling? We only have 2 questions. And one is to let me know what you know. The second one is literally to tell me which topics you want me to focus on. So the Zoom poll is activated. Should I read the questions? Yeah, okay. So question number one, how well do you know the climate adaptation program?
Can you
You know
also read
nothing?
the possible answers, Chiz,
Yep,
so we can get the
starting
interpreters?
line, first time I'm hearing about this. Second answer, beginner, I know something little about it. 3, intermediate, I have some knowledge and experience. 4, advanced, I know it quite well and have extensive experiences. And last one, I know this so well, I can run this course for you. So that's question number 1. Okay, please just continue to put your answers. And the second one is actually kind of important because this will help me guide what to emphasize in the presentation of next 20 minutes. Which topic would you like to focus on this particular session? The first one, GEF 7 LDCF SDCF programming update. 2, GEF priorities for climate change adaptation. 3, how to access LDCF SDCF support. 4, results and impacts. What differences are we making in the lives and the environment? And the last one is, why don't we just cut to the chase and go straight to the Q&A? Okay, let me just keep it open for a little bit more. Okay, I think we have over half the people. Let's just wait it to get it to maybe over 300, 2/3 or so.
I see that no one is saying yet that they're a master and can run this session.
I know, which is a little disappointing because I was going to ask the masters to help me answer some questions or complement some of the things that are being said in the chat. But perhaps some of the people who thinks they're in the advanced knowledge can help me out and clarify some things in the chat or offer some perspectives. Okay, I think that's good. What the poll is telling us is quite a number of you know something about it. But overall, I think that it probably makes sense for me to spend a little bit of time to go over the basics of the LDCF and SDCF. In terms of the priority topics to be covered in the next, at this point, 16 minutes, what are the priorities for climate change adaptation support? And obviously how to access the LDCF and SDCF seems to be a very popular topic. So with that, could I ask the colleagues to take the poll down and put up the presentation? Thank you, Nicholas. Great, thank you so much. So now let me take maybe 10 minutes or so to present the GEF's climate change adaptation program. And I just wanted to highlight the photos you see in this presentation are primarily from the LDCF projects on the ground, and they are almost all of them are from UNDP. I wanted to put them in there because they can give you a visual flavor of local context as well as what and who these LDCF projects are supporting. Okay, next slide, please. So the slide deck, which I'm not going to go over everything, covers quite a number of topics. And let me spend a few minutes to go over the overview. Then I will switch over to talk about the things you wanted me to focus on, which is the priorities and how to access. Okay. Okay, let me go to the next slide, please. Quick overview of the GEF's climate change adaptation support. For the GEF, you've been hearing so far about the GEF Trust Fund, which supports the various themes, including climate change mitigation, biodiversity, land degradation, also issues related to blended finance. For the climate adaptation, the GEF's actions are supported by 2 funds, which were established in 2001. One is called the Least Developed Countries Fund. And as the name indicates, it's a fund for 46 LDCs. The other fund we have is SCCF, which is a Special Climate Change Fund. It's a fund for all countries. And both of them are designated as a financial mechanism for the UNFCCC, which is the Convention on Climate Change. Both of them are also designated to serve the Paris Agreement. They're in the original Paris Agreement decision language. What have we done so far? If you look at the portfolio supported by these two funds, we've done close to $2 billion in grant financing and for almost 400 projects. And we've covered 98 countries so far. I just want to highlight that through the LDCF, we've supported at least one implementation-oriented projects in every single LDC so far. So there is already a track record as well as experiences in the countries on how to access and utilize these funds. In terms of what do these funds finance, you see a little chart over here, and it covers anything from management and planning, policy, information, physical infrastructure, warning and early observation systems, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, different financing opportunities, as well as technologies and technical matters. And last point I wanted to make is these two funds are not replenished like the GEF Trust Fund. They are voluntary funds. What that means is throughout the year, we get announcements as pledges that are made. And the most recent one you see in the corner is, I'm sure you all recognize her. It's the Chancellor of Germany. On the 25th of January, there was a climate adaptation summit where she announced a new contribution of 100 million euros to the LDCF. So the good news is donors are continuing to support the LDCF. Just to let you know, the last fiscal year 2020, we had the highest level of annual contributions finalized for the LDCF through the history of the fund. So the fund is being supported, and we want to make sure that continues. We have more challenges in SCCF, which I'm going to talk a little bit more. Next one, please. So strategy highlight as well as some of the priorities. The GEF 7 strategy, you can read the goal. What's very important to us is that the fund supports activities that are aligned with longer-term adaptation goal of the Paris Agreement. And the fund is also offering opportunities to enable mainstreaming of adaptation. What I mean by this is fund is offering, the two funds are offering opportunities to be able to do cross-linked activities and projects between the adaptation as well as other focal areas of the GEF, the so-called multi-trust fund or multi-focal area initiatives. And we think that's a very unique opportunity as well as a priority for the GEF, because most of the countries as well as initiatives we look at, there are elements on adaptation that are also cutting across to other focal areas and addressing the needs across the systems that the GEF is trying to address. Another priority is that we need to be providing timely and equitable access and more streamlined decision making. So there have been quite a number of changes made in the GEF 7 period. Previously, for the LDCF in particular, there was a pipeline and countries had to wait quite a bit of time. Now the decision making is through the work program modality the council looks at, and there is no more pipeline, and we've moved into the more, I would say, smooth operations where proposals that have gotten the point of technical clearance, by the time the work program is constituted, most of them make it into that work program. So the support is provided to the countries in a quick and more timely manner. And engagement with private sector and promoting innovation is also important. Let's go to the next slide. So we have a good team of dedicated professionals with tremendous talent, expertise, and obviously great smiles that you see here. Some colleagues also work with the GEF Trust Fund, while others are dedicated to the LDCF and SCCF. And I wanted to show this slide because within the team, we do have different coverage areas in terms of countries and regions as well as themes. So depending on your location, as well as thematic interests, different team members here are likely to be a point of contact with the LDCF and SCCF team going forward. Okay, can we go to now slide 10, please? Keep going. Thank you very much. So let's talk very quickly about how to access LDCF. Each LDC has a $10 million cap in GEF 7. It's 100% grant-based. And we asked the national project to address urgent immediate adaptation priority, and they be aligned with your NAP, National Adaptation Plan of Action, or NAP, or what's actually included in your NDCs, as well as any other document that highlights your adaptation priority for the country level. And you will develop a concept with your agency of choice, and the agency will submit the concept for review and technical clearance. And I believe after this session, there will be more discussion on the project cycle. So I'm not going to go into the specific of the project cycle, but wanted to highlight the work program as well as your projects coming to us through the LDCF and SCCF are now approved through a work program that the LDCF and SCCF Council will approve. And most of the policy and program cycle guidelines do apply. There are some differences, a key difference being the treatment of co-financing at the portfolio level and individual projects, where we're not requiring co-financing for the LDCF projects. And the whole notion of the investment mobilized also doesn't apply because these are all LDCs. And we are looking to and also openly supporting opportunities for cross-programming with the GEF Trust Fund. So for the LDCF as well as SCCF, you will see quite a number of so-called multi-trust fund projects. Next one, please. Okay, so how to access SCCF? As I said, the resources for the SCCF are very limited. So at this point, we have 3 entry points. One is activities that would help to mainstream adaptation, and these tend to take the form of a multi-trust fund projects where the SCCF will provide modest contribution to a larger GEF trust fund projects to ensure the resilience as well as adaptation elements are mainstream more robustly. Okay, and the second one entry point is a challenge program for adaptation innovation. We have the first call for proposals, and this is was very popular. We had close to 400 applicants. We ended up picking 10 proposals, and anybody who private sector, civil society, countries, they could all apply. And then we went through the process of, if you will, matching the winning concepts to the GEF agencies, so those can be projectized within the GEF framework. There's a slide in here, and if there is further questions, I can talk a little bit more about that. Another one is more innovative programming, where we're looking into supporting fairly risky, but very innovative and promising private sector as well as more partnership-oriented programs. Once again, projects approved by the LDCF and SCCF Council through the work program. If it's a medium-sized project, it's approved by the CEO. Again, the GEF project and program cycle policies apply, and the results are tracked by core indicators. Can we now go to slide 8? Okay, priorities towards GEF 7 completion. We have 4 of them here. The very first one is that we have 60 months remaining in the GEF 7 period, and we're redoubling our efforts to leave no LDCs behind. What does this really mean? I talked a little bit about each and every LDC having a $10 million cap to access resources. At this point, we've managed to program in 39 LDCs, but there is still quite a number that have yet to come to us and have not accessed any amounts this year. So full amounts still left on the table. Countries include Bhutan, Central African Republic, Comoros, Eritrea, Lesotho, Madagascar, Niger, Sao Tome and Principe, and Somalia. Now, I know that some of these countries are close to submitting concept to us, while others, we are going through multiple channels to reach out to you and try to establish a contact so we can understand and we can support you. So if you're from any of these countries, particularly from, I know, Central African Republic, Comoros, and Eritrea, we're very keen to get in touch with you and discuss this further. And I know there is a number of people from Central African Republic, for instance, from the government attending this session. So we're very keen to further engage with you. And there's also quite a number of countries that have yet to reach the $10 million cap. And they include Guinea, Kiribati, Malawi, Mali, Nepal, Solomon Islands, Timor-Leste, Tuvalu, and Zambia. Again, I know some of these countries have already submitted proposals to us that are under review. Others, we really would like to make sure that you take advantage of the remaining opportunity within the GEF7 period to address your adaptation priorities. SCCF, clearly the needs outweigh the resources, but like I said, we're going to have another call for proposals this year for the Challenge Program for Adaptation Innovation, most likely once again between the SCCF and LDCF. So that's an opportunity for people having innovative ideas that might not fit into neatly as a country project to come to us and request support, and it's a competitive process. And we're looking to support additional multi-trust fund program projects. There's, I think, quite a number that are being discussed and developed further. So we are open to supporting those. Another important priority is the development of the new strategy. The strategy development consultation will start after the June 2021 LDCF-CCF Council, and it will run parallel, if you will, to the replenishment process. But like I said, since the funds are voluntary and they're not replenished, the discussion will be more on the programming, strategy programming directions, as well as perhaps some discussions on how to stabilize the funding and the financial base. Last but not least, GEF and GCF collaboration. We're in the process of further developing what's called the long-term vision on complementarity. And I wanted to put this here because the LDCF has been one of the more advanced, if you will, grounds where GEF and GCF have been collaborating to come up with tandem programs, as well as looking at the results of the readiness support the GCF provided to help inform what we can support. And there's also quite a bit of more conscious co-financing of activities between the two funds going on as of now. So that's 18 minutes. I'm conscious of the time. So why don't we open for questions? And I'm happy to answer any questions or elaborate further.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chiz. Let me turn directly to William to help us navigate questions. William.
Yes, we have quite a few coming in, so let me start. So let's see. Does the SCCF finance both national and regional projects? Is it possible for a country to apply to both SCCF and LDCF at the same time? I recently heard we can combine GEF star allocation with climate change adaptation allocation in one project. How feasible is this? Let's start with those three.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me take the last question. You can very easily combine your proposal to address the adaptation and the GEF Trust Fund elements. As a matter of fact, if you look at the portfolio of activities the LDCF is supporting in GEF7, I think close to 30% are so-called the multi-trust fund projects. And many of those are between either land degradation focal area and or biodiversity focal area. So it is possible to combine those two. Second question, can a country come and combine LDCF and SCCF resources? I think in reality that's very difficult because the LDCs already have its own dedicated fund, and SCCF at this point are more supporting regional and global activities and more innovation-oriented programming, as well as the challenge program. Having said that, we have had some cases, I think 3, where the challenge program recipients ended up tapping into both the LDCF and SCCF to come together with a nice model where there's a dedicated activities focused on the LDCs, but also having the global element supported by the SCCF. But they are not country projects. They are more activities that are cutting across the entirety, if you will, of the support needs across the countries. First question, can you combine national and regional activities? Yes, there have been cases where, let's say, the GEF Trust Fund will support the country-specific elements, and the SCCF or LDCF will come in and provide the regional coverage. One good example is a soil care program in the Caribbean. So there are other examples like that. Okay, William, any more questions?
Are you there, William? We don't hear you.
Sorry, I keep muting and unmuting myself. Okay, there are plenty of questions coming in. Yes, absolutely. So, would the GEF welcome projects funded by the LDCF and SCCF with a focus on empowerment and women and enhancement of gender equality? Would you advise that those projects are better funded through STAR allocation or GEF Trust funds? Does the GEF 7 window closure on 30 June actually 2022 apply for the LDCF funds, or do that remain open after that? Do countries have a specific cap for the amount they can access on SCCF? Let's go with those.
Okay, thank you very much. Gender, I believe there's going to be further discussion on the gender policy and how we're mainstreaming gender, right? I see Seojo nodding along.
Yes, there will be. Yeah.
Good. So just to clarify, the gender policy as well as gender elements are very important for the CCF and LDCF. We have seen projects based on the national prioritization that is literally looking into the whole notion of how to get women more engaged in adaptation action, community action, as well as other types of initiatives. So it is possible to utilize the LDCF resources and SCCF resources for initiatives that would have very strong and very prominent and proactive emphasis as well as engagement on the gender front. At the end of the GEF 7 period, June 30th of 2022, that is also the end of the current LDCF and SCCF strategy. So July 1st, 2022, we will move into the new strategy, which we still have to develop and agree upon. So what that means is that the funds will continue to be available to the countries, but the 10 million cap as well as a cumulative cap that I talked about will actually settle, if you will, at the end of GEF 7, and we move into the next phase. So it's a little bit like a STAR allocation in the sense that if you have an allocation or cap this now, it's use it or lose it. Specific cap on SCCF was the third question I had. At this point, the SCCF is strapped for resources, so we're not really supporting national level activities. We just simply do not have the resources to do it. So there is no cap, and our emphasis, like I said, is to do the mainstreaming of adaptation initiatives with the GEF Trust Fund, Challenge Program, as well as more innovative programs that might cut across the entirety of the spectrum of the needs that we're looking into. And those might include, let's say, a couple of good examples for SCCF, supporting accelerating action in SME. So we have an SME accelerator that would be applicable for everybody. Another one is the establishment of the first ever private sector equity fund. It's called the CRAFT. And so through that, we are also trying to catalyze opportunities to mobilize private sector resources, which all countries should be able to put in to tap into. Any other questions?
Yeah, thanks so much, Chiz. William, any last question? And then we need to keep moving, I think. William?
Last question then, let's do this one. What is the deadline for submitting projects for countries that have not reached their ceiling, presumably in the LDCF? What is the budget and what is the duration for these projects that could be submitted? Thank you.
Okay, very good question. If you want to have your project approved by the council, we're talking about full-size projects, there will be 3 more opportunities by the end of GEF 7. We have a work program coming up in June of this year. We should have another work program coming up in at the fall council. Help me out here, William. That's November or December of 2021, and we will have the last work program in May of 2022. Plenty of opportunities and time left between now and then for you to pull together your PIF and reach towards the technical clearance, so we can include them in the work program as they come up.
Terrific. All right. Let me just say thank you very much, Chiz, for the wonderful presentation, for fielding the questions, watching the clock. Really appreciated. And just to say the overview of the GEF's work on adaptation, the big priorities in this work to strengthen resilience and reduce vulnerability in what we know as a climate changing world. And then doing that by aligning with the Paris Agreement, the importance of equitableness in decision making, linking with the private sector, our earlier discussion, and then some discussion about how to access the funds, the innovative programming, the importance of completing the programming, the collaboration with the GCF, and where the funds come from. I noticed the picture of Chancellor Merkel. It almost looked like she was in the meeting with us. And it was great to see also the smiling faces of your team. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, all right. Well, let us take one deep breath. And we're about to switch into our next major session this morning. We've built a little bit of time into this session, so I won't ask people to rush through. I think we'll have the time to do it because we will have the questions and answers for this next session in the following day in the breakout groups. And so this section is entitled, let me see, Design and Implement a Project, a Practical Guide to Policies and Guidelines. I would like to turn it over to Paola, who is the manager in the Office of Policies, Partnership and Operations, working with Francoise, the director, who will guide us through this session and the presentations. Paola, are you there?
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, everyone. This is really a session dedicated to how to. And so before I go into introducing this session, I would like to acknowledge the colleagues who are making the how to today possible. These are my team, the people who are in the background helping us to make this introduction seminar possible. Christina, our host, Nicolas, Ted, Michael, Regine, Olga, Susan Sejong, under the guidance of William. So why don't you, Nicolas, stop sharing the presentation and just show your pictures here, since we did a nice showing our people yesterday. With Peter. I just want everyone to see who you are, and thank you for all the work in making this introduction seminar possible. This is also the country support program team. So our ministers, OFPs, are quite familiar with them, and they're also the council organization team. So please join me in thanking them. And with Francoise, we are really proud to help you connect with each other and remain in contact throughout. So thanks a lot, everyone. And now let me, Christina, we don't see you. You're the host and you're the most important person here. So there you are, connecting from Hungary.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Hello. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much. So now we'll go to this session, which is quite important. Yesterday, our CEO Carlos Manuel reminded us that the GEF is really financing a fraction of the global needs to make the environment our stable home for the next century. And still, we do reach out to 700 million with 700 million dollars, we reach out to beneficiaries in 143 countries. Our disbursements are at 25%. We have 190 projects globally. And today we're here to talk to you and exchange with you about how this all happens. How do we move from the great idea to impact climate change, land degradation, deforestation, and biodiversity into an actual project? How is a project designed? How is it implemented? As Francoise reminded us yesterday, We have guidelines, we have policies. They're not obstacles, they're actually there to help us guide an idea into something concrete called a project, different types of projects and programs that the GEF finances and that you make possible on the ground. So today we're going to really look at how, what everything you need to know to prepare and implement a project. We have 3 segments in this session. The first is really about the basics of how to start, what is the project cycle in the GEF. Then we're going to move into what critical steps we need to follow to prepare and implement a project. We have some new, very detailed program and project guidelines that have been prepared. So Henry will guide us through the first presentation. He's our operations coordinator. Then we're going to have Jonathan present the guidelines that were just approved. And we then will move to how COVID-19 has affected our project preparation and implementation and how the GEF has responded with additional flexibility. That will be our first segment. We're then going to move into specific policies that we follow, and we have 2 segments with policies. So I would ask you to please bear with us and follow the presentations. We're going to have dedicated breakout rooms with for questions, because we certainly expect you to have very concrete case-specific questions on this very hands-on presentation today. So we are going to have breakout rooms in different languages that we have planned for tomorrow morning. But let's see where we get. We want you to stay through the 3 segments of these presentations today. It is going to be very important to listen to the different policies on stakeholder engagement, on safeguards, on gender. So we hope you will remain engaged with us, and please do let us know through the chat if you anticipate specific questions. But before we start with Henry and his presentation on the project cycle, Sejong, who is our country liaison officer covering Asia, the Pacific, is going to test us a little bit with some key questions. So Sejong, why don't you go ahead with your quiz?
Thank you, Paula. All right, so Christina, can we have the quiz, mini quiz up on the screen? Yes, everyone see that pop-up window.
Perfect. Thank you,
sure. I have 4 questions on GEF policies and operations. You know the drill. I see people already answering. So let me read. Question number 1. What percentage of full-size project agency fee is committed after PIF council approval? 10% of agency fee, 20%, 30%, or 50%? Make your selection. All right. I think there's only one person who have selected choice. Anyone has any problem, technical problem? Hope not. All right. So that's number 1. I see more people are selecting. Oh, perfect. Okay. Would it be 10%, 20%, 30%, and 50% after PIF council approval? Question number 2. You can scroll down to see the whole questions. Question number 2, what activities are eligible for PPG, Project Preparation Grants, PPG? Remember, note this is a multiple choice. So there's more than one answers, multiple choices. A, hiring international consultants to conduct feasibility studies. B, costs associated with the work of government employees. C, public consultations with affected communities to discuss a project concept. D, purchase of vehicles. So choose multiple choice, multiple answer that you think it's eligible for PPG. Question number 3, true or false? The GEF's policy on stakeholder engagement applies only to projects with a high and medium risk. True or false? Last question, number 4. Which one is not required by the GEF minimum fiduciary standard? A, GEF agencies must ensure executing entities have adequate fiduciary control to manage GEF funds. B, GEF agencies must have their own policies, procedure, institutional capacity, and legal arrangements to implement the GEF fiduciary standard. C, GEF agencies must record its compliance with the standard in the PIF for council approval. Which one is not true? All right, I see over 100 people answered. Okay, I see that it keeps going up. Okay, so now I know, okay, I'll give you maybe five more seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now let's see the results. Okay, perfect. Oh, okay, I see. You know that color code does not necessarily mean this is the right answer. So let me give you the answer for number 1. The right answer is actually B, 20%. 20%. So which policy document do we need to look at to find the answer? This is project and program cycle policy. According to this policy, full-size project agency fee is committed in 3 tranches. The first is 20% upon the PIF council approval. The second one is 50% of agency fees committed after agency's first disbursement to countries, which is a key milestone. This is where the countries receive GEF funding for the first time. And the last tranche is 30% fee is dispersed after midterm review submission. Question number 2, the right answer here, this is a multiple choice. Right answer here is A and C. So these two expenditure items are eligible for PPG grants. Which documents that do we need to look at? This is a project and program cycle guidelines. This guidelines has very user-friendly text box. It lists all the eligible and ineligible expenditure for PPGs. PPG amount for full-size project is generally between $100,000 and it can go up to $300,000, but it's meant for certain eligible activities. Question number 3, yes, that's you're correct. False. Stakeholder engagement policy and guidelines, which went through very extensive public consultation. This policy states, stakeholder engagement is required for all GEF projects, regardless of risk level. This one is the most fundamental principle that GEF is built upon. Now, how do we know this is done? Every GEF project document has a mandatory field to report on stakeholder consultation activities, which is also subject to Secretariat's review. So, and as you know, all GEF project documents are publicly disclosed. Now, last question, fiduciary standard. The right answer here is C, which is not true. GEF agency must record its compliance with the standard in the PIF for council approval, that's not required by the fiduciary standard, because fiduciary standard compliance assessment is done on agency's institutional level, not on the project level. So project level, therefore this information does not go in the PIF. Then how do we know that GEF agencies are in compliance? Once in every replenishment cycle, all 18 agencies are subject to independent compliance review, which is currently going on. And all 18 agencies must show they are in full compliance with the GEF fiduciary requirements. Thank you very much. Everyone did a great job. Thank you. Now let me.
Great. Thank you very much, Sejong. And we're already receiving questions from Henry. So why don't I let Henry and Jonathan manage this first segment of the 4 presentations. We have already questions on what committing means, what the PPG finances. So I'll let Henry cover these. They're going to be covered during the project and program cycle presentation. Over to you, Henry. And Henry Salazar is very well known to everyone. He coordinates our operations cluster, and he's really the quality assurance person with a very good team working with him. Go ahead, Henry, please. You're muted, Henry.
Sorry. Now it's okay?
Perfect, perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. The policy on the GEF project and program cycle approved by Council describes all the mandatory steps that the GEF finance project needs to go through from the beginning until the end. Please, let's imagine that we are traveling by car from city number 1 to city number 4. And there is only one road, no shortcuts. After leaving city 1, the car, this is a project, needs to go first to city 2, then to city 3, to finally arrive to the city number 4. This presentation focuses on the journey, the different steps of the project and program cycle. The following presentations from my colleagues will describe other policies and guidelines that are associated with this policy. The policy is structured around the types of projects that the GEF finances. We call those type of projects GEF modalities. The full-size project, and can you go back, please? The full-size project is a project that receives more than 2 million in GEF financing. The medium-sized project, less than 2 million. The enabling activities aim to finance the preparation of a plan and a strategy or a report to fulfill the commitments under a convention, and the programs that were explained by my colleagues Claude and Mohamed yesterday are individual but interlinked child projects that aim to achieve large-scale impacts on the environment. Next one. I will take more time explaining the project cycle of the full-size project. The reason is that other project cycle modalities are a variation of this modality. And let me start with the big picture. The steps in the upper part of the slide represent what we call the preparation phase, while the steps in the lower part of the slide represent the implementation phase. Initially, I will focus a little bit more on the steps inside the blue rectangle. When a project idea, and this is the first part, the project idea is identified, the GEF agency includes the concept in a template known as the Project Identification Form, or a PIF. A letter of endorsement signed by the operational focal point is required. The GEF agency submits the PIF to the GEF Secretariat via the portal. And this is the first step of the project cycle, represented by the box in dark blue in the left-hand side. For full-size projects, the submission of PIFs have a deadline twice per year, and normally this is 2 to 3 months before each council meeting. When the GEF Secretariat receives the PIFs, they review the PIFs. Normally, the GEF Secretariat provides comments to the agencies. The agencies address those comments until the PIF is ready to receive the clearance. Ready means that the PIF is technically sound and in compliance with GEF policies, guidelines, and procedures, those that my colleagues are going to explain in a few minutes. Based on several criteria, regional distribution, resource availability, programming priorities, the constitution of the work program is made with some of the clear PIFs. The work program is posted then 4 weeks prior to the council meeting, and these council meetings normally are held here in Washington twice per year. Other agencies, convention secretariats, council members, and staff can review and provide comments on each PIF. When the council meeting is held, and the last 2 council meetings have been virtually held, because of the COVID, the council discusses and approves the work program. And this is the second step of the project cycle that is represented in the box in light blue. Usually, the council approves the whole work program, but any council member can request one or more PIFs to be submitted for the review 4 weeks prior to CO endorsement, which is the fourth step. I'm getting there in a few minutes. After the council approves the work program, the agency initiates the preparation of the project. Remember that what the council approved initially was the concept of the project, not the fully developed project. When the project is prepared, the fully developed project is submitted to the Secretariat via portal for CO endorsement. And this is the third step of the project cycle, represented in the box in light yellow. Then the Secretariat reviews the fully prepared project, but the level and the scope of this review and the requirements is a bit different from the level and the scope when the PIF was submitted initially some months ago. When ready, and again, ready means that the project is technically sound and in compliance with the GEF policies, guidelines, and procedures, the project is ready for CO endorsement, which is now the fourth step of the project cycle represented by the box in dark yellow. CO endorsement means that the fully prepared project document is, from the Secretariat point of view, ready to move on to the next steps. And now we move outside the blue rectangle to the other 2 steps in the preparation phase. The journey continues. And now the project, the car is moving to the light green color step, which is the internal approval of the agency. The agency has to review the project, approve the project, and when the project is approved by the agency starts the negotiation with the country or the countries involved in the project. Normally, this negotiation finalizes with a document that is signed between the agency and the country. And then the first disbursement between the agency and the executing agency defines the end of the preparation phase, but also at the same time triggers the startup of the project implementation phase in the lower part of the slide. This is represented by the box in dark green color. From this moment onwards, the agency is responsible to submit to the Secretariat different reports: annual project implementation reviews, midterm reviews, terminal evaluations, all represented in the boxes from left to right in the lower part of the slide. Details on these reports are coming in a few minutes. To finalize, the agency submits the terminal evaluation to the GEF Independent Evaluation Office. Then the project financial closure with the trustee needs to happen within 12 months of terminal evaluation submission. Once the project is financially closed, the implementation phase finalizes. Next slide, please. Thank you. As I mentioned at the beginning, the other modalities are following similar steps with very few variations. For programs, and you have in front of you the project cycle of programs, the variations are highlighted in red color. The first difference is that instead of a PIF, the programs are submitted through a program framework document or PFD. The second variation or the second difference is that programs are made of child projects, some of which are full-size projects, others are medium-sized projects. For medium-sized projects, instead of submitting the project for CO endorsement, the agencies submit the project for CO approval. This is only a modification in the language, but the idea is the same. The fully prepared project document needs to be reviewed by the GEF Secretariat. The third difference is that unlike standalone full-size projects, all child projects need to be circulated to council 4 weeks prior to CO endorsement or to CO approval, with no exceptions. And the final difference is that per policy, only full-size projects, and this is represented in the lower part of the slide, in the pink or just fuchsia square, only full-size projects are required to prepare and submit midterm reviews. Medium-sized projects are encouraged to do so, but it is not compulsory. For medium-sized projects, again, we have some variations that are represented in red color in the upper part. The first difference is that the GEF CEO has a delegated authority by council to approve the PIFs of a medium-sized project. Consequently, as medium-sized projects are not part of a work program, there is no deadline for the submission of PIFs. This happens on a rolling basis throughout the year. And the second, can you go back, please, in the previous? No, you are correct, Nico. I finalized with the medium-sized projects. Finally, enabling activities. For enabling activities, the two differences are the following. Instead of a PIF or a PFD, the fully developed enabling activity is submitted through an enabling activity template. And I say the fully developed enabling activity because unlike full-size projects and medium-sized projects that are submitted first, the PIF, and then the CO endorsement, CO approval, the enabling activities are submitted fully prepared for the secretarial review. And the last difference is that enabling activities do not provide reports such as the annual project implementation reviews or the midterm reviews or the terminal evaluation. The enabling activities only submit the final report to the convention secretariat. Final slide. If you want to know and learn more about the project and program cycle policy, you can go to the link in the screen. Thank you very much. And I give the floor to my colleague, Jonathan. Jonathan, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much, Harry. Jonathan is our senior policy specialist, and he's the author of the guidelines that you have received as part of the link to the website with the invitation. So Jonathan, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Paula. Hello, everyone. Good to be here. I won't profess to be the author of them, but I'll try to help decipher them.
It's the convener with a lot of consultations with the colleagues who are present today. Thank you.
Yeah. So I hope you can hear me. I'm abandoned the headset and going with the
yeah, we hear you well, Jonathan.
This is essentially our manual for project preparation and management. And a lot of agencies say this is, they have dog-eared copies of this that they go to find out questions of the intricacies of GEF project preparation. So we try to pull everything together in one place and provide practical guidelines related to a number of policies that touch the project cycle. So I'll just, in about 4 or 5 slides, describe a document that's over 100 pages long. We've also made some updates to this in 2020 that I'll briefly describe. So next slide. So the policies, a bit of a background in terms of what the GEF policies and guidelines are. As Francois mentioned yesterday, it's not about bureaucracy, it's about trying to improve the quality and results of GEF projects. So we develop policies in consultation with council, agencies, recipient countries, civil society. And the idea there is to meet the specific requests that are made during the replenishment process and requirements from our council. So they tend to, we tend to try to reflect international best practice and benchmark agency practice. And an important thing to remember too is that the GEF is a partnership of various international organizations and agencies. And so the GEF uses the policies and procedures of the implementing partners that implement GEF projects. So GEF policies are designed to align with those, not to add an additional layer, but to rather bring everyone to a level playing field in terms of how GEF projects are implemented. The guidelines then are developed by us at the level of the Secretariat, again, in consultation with a number of external partners. And they provide additional detail and some guidance on what things mean practically and interpreting some of the things in the policies. So the next slide shows what has happened in GEF 7. We had a fairly heavy agenda in the GEF 7 replenishment to update GEF policies and practices. For those who might have been involved in this process, I mean, you'll know it's driven by council requests, stakeholders looking for further clarity and improvement in GEF results. So we cover all of these issues in our guidelines, and I'm not going to go into detail on each one of them. As you'll see from the agenda, colleagues are going to go into and describe briefly in the presentations that are going to follow. But these are the main issues that were adopted in GEF 7, dealing with results-based management, stakeholder engagements, safeguards, gender equality, a big piece of knowledge management and co-financing. But again, this will all be covered in greater detail in subsequent presentations. So the next slide shows that in the guidelines, what we've tried to do at a more detailed level is really around these 4 areas. Improve the clarity of project budgets. So we've adopted a standard template that clarifies the expenses that are covered by things like project management costs, M&E budgets. And the idea here is to improve the consistency and comparability across the agencies. So the templates that you'll need for these are all available on the GEF website under the templates tab. The second bucket of things that we worked on had to do with monitoring and evaluation. As we've already heard from Cyril, there's been quite a bit of work done on this already. But we wanted to clarify what expenses in particular were covered by the monitoring and evaluation plans and budgets. So we've given some sort of general benchmarks based on what we observed in GEF 6 that sort of land on projects up to 5 million shouldn't have M&E budgets over 5% of the project budget. To a sliding scale and over 10 million, it shouldn't be more than 2% of the budget. But again, this detail is all in the M&E budget section of the guidelines. Another big area where there's been some confusion and some discussion over the years is on this issue of implementation and execution functions. So what we've brought into the guidelines are some additional clarity on this, emphasizing that the dual function is really an exception to the rule in project management, because again, the GEF is a partnership. It's not a legal entity per se that enters into contracts. So we rely very heavily, funders and council relies very heavily on the ability of the supervising entities to supervise. And then that's a separate function from execution. So we've clarified that the OFP needs to confirm acceptance of any dual role in a letter, and that budgets clearly need to separate these 2 things. Finally, on co-financing, we've tried to clarify here some of the reporting that's needed on how the calculation of materialized co-financing and recurrent expenditures are to be done. And again, Mina will go into some more detail on the co-financing aspect later on in the morning. So the next slide, just where to go for additional information. I mean, again, this is a bit of a bear of a document. It tries to pull together all the relevant policies that touch the project cycle. So it's there are some policies, of course, that aren't included in the guidelines. That they have their own separate guidelines. But this is all packaged on our website under policies and guidelines. and this is where you can get the additional detail there. We approved the updated guidelines in 2020, circulated them around to all the OFPs and agencies and to council. So so that's where you can find it. And so I'll stop there, and we can go into more detail on each of these issues in the next presentations. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. So back over to you, Henry.
Yes, thank you, Paula. Now I will present two topics: implementation versus execution and agency fee. Next slide, thank you. Yesterday, Francois explained that per policy, there is a preclusion to merge implementation and execution functions in the GEF. Let me start by saying that in some languages, both terms are very similar. However, in the GEF language, they are different. Implementation entails the oversight of the project execution to ensure that the project is being carried out in accordance with the agreed standards and requirements that normally are stated in the document signed between the country and the agency. You may remember that in the previous presentation, I mentioned that once the agency approved the project, they engage in a negotiation with the country and they normally sign a document. Execution, on the other hand, entails the management and administration of the day-to-day activities of the projects in accordance with the specific project requirements in an agreement that the executing agency is signing with the GEF agency responsible for the implementation. Next slide, thank you. Then, who implements a project? One or more of the 18 GEF agencies. You have the logos in the upper side of the slide. And who executes the project? In the case of national projects, the idea is that national institutions, either a governmental or non-governmental institution, will do that. For regional or global projects, it can be that several national institutions execute the project, or a regional or a global organization will execute the project. Some examples are in the logos in the left-hand side, in the lower part of the screen. Why the separation of functions? Well, because this responds to the GEF governance model specifically for these two reasons. The first one is that there is a conflict of interest if the same institution implements and executes the project. And the second, very important reason, to enhance the development of national capacities. The only way for a country to learn how to execute a project is by doing it. No other way to learn that. Next slide, please. Thank you. That said, yesterday, Francois also mentioned that in exceptional cases, a GEF agency can play both roles, implementing and executing functions of the whole project or portions of it, as long as we have these two conditions. The first one, there is a support letter signed by the operational focal point of the participant countries. In this letter, the operational focal points need to specify the execution functions, and the costs of these activities must be reflected in the budget that Jonathan mentioned a couple of minutes ago. And the second condition is that the agency that aims to execute the project needs to present an institutional arrangement for the separation of implementation and execution functions in different departments of the GEF agency. They have to be completely separated. Now let's move on to the following topic, which is the agency fee. The agency fee is defined as the compensation that a GEF agency receives to cover the costs in delivering GEF-specific project cycle management services on the left-hand side and corporate activities Some examples of these project cycle management services and corporate activities are included in the slide. And remember that you will have access to the slide right now, I think, in the website. How the agency fee is calculated. There are two criteria to calculate the agency fee: the type of GEF agency and the amount of the GEF financing allocated to the project. Let me start with the type of agency. For all the 8 accredited GEF agencies in 2015, they are listed in the left-hand side of the slide, the agency fee is 9%. For the other agencies, which are the 10 agencies that were accredited before 2015, the agency fee is 9% for projects or programs with a GEF financing above $10 million. However, if the allocated GEF financing is below $10 million, the agency fee for these 10 agencies is 9.5%. The preparation grant, which are the funds that the GEF provides to prepare the project, part of the question that CEO John presented at the beginning, the preparation grant follows the same fee of the project, either 9 or 9.5%. Last 3 slides, the commitment schedule of the agency fee. Commitment is a technical term that means that the agency can request the funds to the trustee. This is one of the questions that John presented in the quiz. For full-size projects, 20% of the agency fee is committed by the time of council approval, 50% by the time of first disbursement, and the remaining 30% by the submission of midterm review. For medium-sized projects, 100% of the agency fee is committed by the time of first disbursement. And for enabling activities, 100% of the agency fee is committed by the time of CEO approval of the enabling activity. And now I give the floor to my colleague Jonathan for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. So ball back to me. So on COVID-related flexibility in the cancellation policy. First, I think it's important to provide a little bit of background on what is the cancellation policy. It's got quite a heady name, and it does cover cancellation, and it covers dropping and suspending a project. But the main focus and objective of this policy that was brought in GEF 7 has to do with incentivizing and speeding up project preparation. So specifically, there's a maximum amount of time between council approval of a project, of a PIF, let's say, and when it needs to be approved or endorsed by the CEO. So that's what the cancellation policy is about. Now along comes COVID, and there have been, of course, unavoidable delays in project preparation. So I'm going to explain a little bit how we're dealing with that. So the next slide just outlines what we've been doing over the past year or so in terms of consultation with partners. I mean, we find out what's happening on the ground through the agencies, through OFPs, through people like you all on this in this seminar, through the CSO network. So we did a number of consultations, and you know, this is especially true during COVID when we're all stuck in Washington or stuck in our kitchens. So in the next slide, this just summarizes the general observations that we've seen so far. You know, as can be expected, there has been not a uniform impact across regions. Some are back open, and some are decidedly not. There's been a fair bit of adaptation at the country level, at the agency level, but we see 3 areas where projects are being implemented. One is it's very hard to do stakeholder consultations. agencies, partners have had to adapt. So that's now, it's possible, but adaptation has taken place. Monitoring has also required some innovation in terms of traditional methods of project monitoring. Going to the field obviously are not possible in every case. And finally, countries are experiencing fiscal stress. So this is having an impact on co-financing. Now, Gustavo mentioned earlier a white paper that was done. We also did a summary of these more operational issues for the last council, the one in December. So we go into a little more detail on this, and if you're interested in that, it's publicly available. It's on our website. The next slide gives a little bit of a summary of the agency feedback. As I mentioned, agencies can proceed with minor amendments to projects without council approval. So there's flexibility already if outputs are not being significantly changed, or if there isn't a change of more than 5% of the budgets, minor amendments go ahead. Agencies reporting some challenges with project preparation, oversight. Obviously, consultation with indigenous peoples and some stakeholders has been more challenging. But there are workarounds. Agencies are able to do virtual missions. There's been a substitution of international consultants for local consultants. So there are some unexpected positive externalities, you could say, in this process. We're all using virtual consultations and supervisions in areas where there is no travel. And interestingly, there's an increased level of collaboration among agencies, sharing resources on the ground for both preparation and supervision. The next slide goes into a little bit of detail about the OFPs. So what have the countries been seeing? So again, challenges at the level of the ministries, budget uncertainty, staff retention, the usual distancing challenges that you see. But again, a lot of the same sort of solutions, virtual means, local consultants, building networks locally of resources that are able to both help move the projects through the GEF project cycle and to implement the projects that we have. So next slide. As I mentioned, the cancellation policy incentivizes faster project preparation and sets out the principles. So I'll go in the next slide into a derivation of Henry's slide that he just showed you on the project preparation cycle. And this just shows, so after PIF submission, there are two important deadlines in the phase of project preparation. First one is when the agency has to submit a request for the CEO endorsement or approval to the Secretariat. So for a full-size project, that has to be submitted within 12 months of the council approval of the PIF. Now there's a procedure for exceptions. So this is the second and third box between council approval and submission. However, if the country and the agency see that they're having difficulties preparing the project, there are delays, they can just inform the Secretariat that this is happening and they need more time. There's a facility through the portal where this can be done. No CEO approval is required, and that notice comes to us. Now, from the third to the fourth box, i.e. from submission to CEO endorsement, there is still a requirement that a project needs to be CEO endorsed or if it's a program approved, but within 18 months of the submission of the council approval of the documents. So there's still that second hard deadline. And what happens, of course, is if the first deadline gets pushed, it squeezes the time between the submission of the CEO endorsement and the time when it's actually endorsed. And during that time, there's a back and forth between the Secretariat and the agency and the country. Some design elements are maybe clarified. So there still needs to be some time between the submission and the endorsement for that that interaction to take place. So the policy then has an exception to this second deadline when there is something like a pandemic. So in cases of force majeure, there is an extension of up to 12 months that can be provided for full-size projects. And I should preface this by saying that FSP is full-size project, and I'm talking just about the full-size projects because, as Henry said, medium-sized projects are sort of a derivation of how this is done. Now, the CEO has already granted an across-the-board extension to this second deadline. And so there's been a 6-month extension to that added to the 18 months that's available. So now from PIF approval until final CEO endorsement, agencies have to have up to 24 months to get the project CEO endorsed. We've also, at the last council, went to council to ask for additional flexibility. And so going forward, the CEO has the ability to grant additional extensions on a case-by-case basis of up to 24 months of this second deadline. So this is it's fairly complicated, I confess, but it's the way the cycle has been designed with these two milestones and how they're treated slightly differently. That's why there is this difference in approach. Again, for specific questions on this, we can talk about this tomorrow in our breakout session. There is more detail in the document that we sent to council in December, so please have a look at that. And then finally, if you have any questions with respect to specific projects, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The next slide, Nico, is just the same thing, but for medium-sized projects. And the situation is the same, except that for a medium-sized project, instead of 12 months after PIF approval, it's 8 months after PIF approval that you have to submit the request for CEO approval. And then there's 4 months between that time and CEO approval. So there's the idea here is medium-sized projects are in theory smaller, that perhaps it's more agile. What we've actually seen is that the same sort of constraints that are hitting full-size projects also hit medium-sized projects. So the one-time extension request of up to 24 months also applies to medium-sized projects. So hopefully I haven't left you more confused than at the beginning, but as I said, we have time for more discussion on this tomorrow. So let me end it there.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. And certainly there are lots of questions here. In the chat, you have Queen and William who've been addressing some of the questions. There was an important question early on about the role of OFPs in preparing concepts. Henry, I would like to address maybe a couple of these questions because they are about this first segment, which is really the foundation of how we prepare projects before we move to the detailed policies. So why, Henry, on OFPs, we need letters of endorsement from the OFPs in order to proceed. So this is a requirement. So there cannot be a project proposal without that. We have an important focus on this in the guidelines. We have seen also how we have adapted our framework to the flexibility that is required under this exceptional situation under COVID. So thank you, Jonathan, for that. If William is quickly answering a lot of the questions on PPG flexibility and others, and Queen, who is our financial management specialist, he's addressing also quite a few questions on the fees. So why don't we take a few minutes? I don't know, William, if you received any questions through the email.
No, I received them all through the chat. I've been compiling them, okay. And I can, if you want to mention some, it's up to you.
Please do, William. Yes, why don't we do that so we cover a little bit the ground on this initial segment?
Yes, there are so many that I'm not sure we can cover them all, but let me take a few of them. So what is the minimum time requirement for a CEO to endorse approval of enabling activity? Should there not be a small percentage of the agency? Let me give you 2 or 3 and then you do them all. Is that okay? So there was another one that had to do with timing also that was good. How long is the process normally between a PIF submission and the first disbursement, and between the first disbursement and the project financial closure? Is it correct that a PIF should be submitted 2 or 3 months prior to council approval of the work program? So those have to do with timing. So let's do those together.
Okay, thank you, William. The time required for an enabling activity to be CO approved, there is no time requirement because, as I mentioned, it is expected that the enabling activity is submitted fully prepared, and then the Secretariat takes some time in the back and forth with the agency. So there is no timeline that will set any type of deadline or hard penalty like a cancellation. So enabling activities are not subject to the cancellation policy because they are submitted at once, fully prepared. The time between PIF submission and first disbursement. Well, we have to decompose this in segments. The PIF is submitted, then 2-3 months, and if we are talking about a full-size project, 2-3 months before the work program discussion at council. Council approves the work program, then the agency has, for a full-size project, 18 months until the project has to be formally CO endorsed. And from that moment onwards, the project is not anymore within the Secretariat, and the Secretariat is not imposing any type of benchmark in terms of the time for the agencies to formally approve and then formally move for the first disbursement, because every agency has different type of requirements and filters to approve the project. However, the fact that now the agency fee is contingent to the first disbursement is incentivizing agencies to move faster to provide the first disbursement. Now, between the first disbursement and the financial closure, it depends on the duration of the project. I mentioned in my presentation that the project has a time frame of 5. I didn't mention that, but they have a time frame normally between 4 to 5 years. After the project reaches the year number 5, the project is terminally evaluated. The terminal evaluation is submitted to the independent evaluation office. And once the terminal evaluation is submitted to the independent evaluation office, the financial closure has to be submitted to the trustee within 12 months. So overall, the lifespan of a project since the beginning, the PIF submission until the financial closure can be in average between 6 to 7 years. That will be something that we have been estimating after some analysis that we have done in the past. I don't know if I miss any other question, William.
Sorry, I wanted to check if I was muted. Okay, let me see. There are so many that it's difficult to cover them all. But so this one perhaps is a good one. So please clarify what you mean by department when GEF agency assigns implementation and execution with the same agency. I think that's the kind of key one. So
yes.
Go with that one.
Can I take that one?
Of course.
Sure. So I just added something in the chat because the policy does say separate departments, and there have been some questions about what that means. And the interpretation essentially is that there's an independence between the two units. And what that means in practice is that they normally report to a different vice president or managing director or senior director within the organization. So the unit that's doing the supervising, coordinating is not the same unit that is executing, and that there are separate reporting lines.
Okay, there's another one that says the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't allow agencies to organize face-to-face meetings and consultations with stakeholders and government agencies. So the projects take longer to prepare. What is the GEF policy on this situation?
So that sort of goes to what I was describing in my short presentation, is that the first milestone. So if the first milestone of submission of the CEO endorsement request can't be met, the OFP, or in the case of a regional project, the agency notifies the Secretariat through the portal that it won't meet that 12-month deadline. And then if the delays persist and it looks like the CEO endorsement package won't be able to be submitted within the next 6 months, then a separate request can be made to the CEO under the force majeure, which in this case is the pandemic. And on a case-by-case basis, an additional extension can be granted. And I should also just mention that there has already been a 6-month extension to that submission requirement granted by the CEO across the board for all projects already approved up until the December Council.
Thank you. What's the role of GEFSEC in midterm review and in the terminal evaluation?
I suggest that we will leave this answer to the next presentation in monitoring and evaluation, because this topic may be covered by my colleague Cyril.
Okay.
In a few minutes.
Very good. And William, any last question before we just take a short reflection?
I think you can go to the break. Thank you.
So let me just come in here to say thanks for this first segment of this session, which, and while I'm saying this, let us just take a little pause because we're getting a lot of really important information here. Also on the chat box. So thanks very much to the presenters and all the good questions. This has been a close-up view of the GEF project cycle and what are really GEF operations and how all this works. It's really a whole world in there that I guess we're now becoming familiar with. I really appreciated Henry's first slide that we're traveling on a journey by car. Even in the Secretariat, I don't think we've seen that one before. It's a very nice image. I was listening carefully. Henry, I think you said there are no shortcuts, which maybe is a painful message. But I think speed is relevant here. How fast we go, speed is being tracked. We just heard about that, 18 months, 12 months. Speed is encouraged, but I suppose there are maybe traffic, speed limits at some point, because we also want high quality projects, which means paying attention to all these important things during project preparation as well as implementation, but going as quickly as possible. And we have road signs to this journey, which I think what Jonathan was saying, the guidelines on the project cycle. There's a lot in there. I suppose some traffic lights too, one of which is this separation between executing entities and implementing agencies. There are some fees, some payments for services by the agencies, and some rules about all of that. And I guess as we're all seeing now, and maybe this is a point why it's good to take a pause here also, there are lots of acronyms in the GEF's world. And I saw some of the questions in the chat box, about to help explain what is a PIF, a PFD, a PPG, an EA. From the earlier session with Matthew and Abril, we have the PSES, we have LDCF from CHIS. We heard have a reference to the portal, all of these things. And Jonathan just put us through a little bit on how COVID-19 is impacting these operations. There are challenges out there, of course, as well as the terrible impacts of this terrible pandemic. We have systems in place to work with those, including a cancellation policy that requires a certain speed in project preparation, but a general exceptions provision, which is the force majeure provision, which allows for extensions of time in extraordinary situations, which includes this pandemic. And we're very grateful for all the effort that agencies and governments and OFPs and stakeholders have been making to develop workarounds. Because this is what's really happening when we apply all of these things that Henry and Jonathan are talking about to the world out there in this time that we're facing. Let us, so before I launch us back and give it back to Paula and the team, let's take a minute or so just to stretch our bodies. We'll have a virtual coffee break in a little while where we can say hello to everybody. There's something on the screen there that is a reference. So deep breath. When we had the last introduction seminar, one of our OFPs actually got in the front of the room and we did some stretch exercises. I'm terrible at that kind of stuff, so I won't try to have us do that. But let us absorb what we've heard so far, and let me thank very much Paula for organizing all of this, and she will keep us going, and Henry and Jonathan for our beginning sessions today.
Thanks a lot, Peter. So there are a few more questions coming in, and while we do have a dedicated breakout session on this whole segment, I think it's important that we address these. Let me ask, there is a question on the STAR. So OFPs would know that at the end of 2020, around Christmas time, we sent some letters alerting them that there will be a deadline to using the GEF 7 STAR allocations. So let me hand over to Nain and Sonja to address this query, because it's very important about the STAR deadline. And then I suggest we continue with the presentation on fiduciary, on the updated fiduciary standards that Jonathan can guide us through, and we start the next segment. So why don't you, Nain and Sonja, address this one, and since it is about yesterday's presentation. Thank you.
We don't hear anything, Nain. Sonja, if you're speaking.
Let me check if I need to unmute them. Just a second, please.
Yes, Sonja is muted. Please, can you unmute them? Thank you, Christina. Is that okay?
Yes, here I am.
Okay, thank
Yes,
you, Sonja. Over to you.
Thanks, Paula. So yes, I saw William actually responded in the chat as well. So we don't have a policy of reducing anyone's allocations. The STAR policy actually says that the letters that we sent out in December, which I wonder if maybe that is what is causing this confusion, says that we, all countries have to present projects to the full value of their STAR allocations by the end of December this year, which is 6 months before the cycle is due to end. So we're not reducing anyone's allocation. It's just for purposes of internal planning and internal arrangements with respect to countries' utilization of their resources. The STAR policy does require that by the end of December 2021, all countries have to present their full values of the allocation. So apologies if we had caused that any kind of confusion with those letters, and I appreciate the question. And if there are any further needs for clarification, please reach out. Thank you.
Let me add that those letters were actually quite detailed and included the balance of the STAR allocation that each country still has. So if there are any questions on that, please do let us know. We do have a very specific, we do have a way to account for that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you,
Okay.
Paula.
Thank you,
Yes.
Peter. So let me now move to the next segment of this session. And let's move into the depth of the specific policies that we follow, particularly on how the funds have to be accounted for and transferred. And we have a policy, an updated policy on minimum fiduciary standards that Jonathan is going to tell us about. We're then going to go into the co-financing and what we have in terms of current snapshot of where we stand on co-financing and what we hope to see without providing firm ceilings. And then we can move to the monitoring policy. There were already questions on that. So We're going to have Jonathan Mina on co-financing, and then Cyril again on the monitoring policy and guidelines. And then we're going to have a virtual coffee break before we move on to the additional policies that we want to cover on safeguards, gender, stakeholder engagement, knowledge management requirements. So please bear with us. Jonathan, over to you again on the minimum fiduciary standards. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Paula. So it's at this point, I think, in the presentation that we start to see the numbers in the participants box start to go down. Anyway, this is a fairly dense concept, and it's also something that isn't project specific. Often we get the question, well, what are the standards that apply project by project? If an agency hasn't met the GEF minimum fiduciary standards, the agency won't be preparing projects. So this happens way upstream of any individual project, project design, project preparation. The next slide, this is something that we have minimum requirements that all agencies have to have. And this is in order to safeguard the funds that are provided from the GEF funders, and B, ensure that they're used well and that they achieve results and global environmental benefits. So there's both a fiduciary safeguard element and an achievement of the overall objectives of the partnership objective, if you will. So the way the GEF does this, again, because the GEF is not a legal organization or an entity like the World Bank or like the Green Climate Fund, it's a partnership. So we therefore have to have a minimum level of these two buckets of standards and capacities for all the agencies that are implementing. The standards are set by council. The council approves these. And then as international best practice evolves over time, these get updated. So council periodically reviews them and updates them. And I'm going to just describe a little bit what happened at the last update in 2019. So the next slide, again, goes over the roles of the GEF agencies vis-a-vis the executing agencies. So council approves the minimum standards, as I mentioned. The GEF agencies apply their policies and procedures that have already been deemed to have met those standards. And then they oversee the executing agencies that execute the projects on the ground. The funds flow from the trustee to the GEF agencies, and then from the GEF agencies to the executing agencies. So these are all interrelated. The new policy that was updated in 2019 includes four main things. New requirements for documentation and reporting environmental and social risks, and how those are managed through the cycle. The role of the Secretariat in reviewing projects for the availability and completeness of information at various stages has been also revised and upgraded. Monitoring and reporting of safeguards implementation at the portfolio level has also been clarified and added. And then the two other things have to do with expanded and strengthened standards in line with international best practice. And some of these are fairly detailed and fairly the level of internal audit, for instance, and the level of controls. And then finally, there are provisions related to the conflict resolution commissioner that have been added, and the roles and responsibilities in that respect when there may be evidence that things aren't working well, what happens, and that's been clarified in the document. So the next slide, there are two buckets of standards. One has to do with project activity processes, and the other has to do with overall governance. So at the project level, agencies need to have certain standards for project appraisal. How is procurement done? How are things bought? How does money get held and transferred? What systems are in place to monitor projects that may be at risk? How is that then reported? Evaluation function and whatnot. The next slide on the governance framework criteria is at the higher level of internal governance of the agency. What external financial audit provisions are in place. I mean, these are fairly standard things. But then, as we've seen, even in the questions today, what does this mean for oversight of executing entities? What structures are in place to ensure that there is a separation of function? How is conflict of interest disclosed? What internal audit functions are there? Are they also reflecting the latest international best practice? And the GEF partnership of 18 agencies is a partnership of agencies of different size, of different governance frameworks. We have everything from large global multilateral development banks to smaller national entities, civil society organizations. So clearly, not everyone is at the same level in terms of all of these various provisions. But the idea of the GEF minimum fiduciary standards is that there is a minimum threshold that everyone meets that gives comfort to our funders, the recipients, everyone who has a stake in the GEF partnership, that the funds are going to be managed properly and that we're going to achieve some results. So then finally, there is quite a bit of detail on this. I would suggest in the last slide, Nico, just shows where to go for additional information. The December Council document has a preamble that describes in quite detail what changes have been made, and then the policy is then attached to that document. So that's your go-to place for the information on this. Each of the agencies have entered into financial procedures agreements with the trustee. And for those legal-minded people among you, if you're interested in looking at those, again, you'll see in those that there is a heavy reliance on the agencies themselves to use their own policies and procedures to manage GEF funds. So rather than being prescriptive as to how they do things, these agreements essentially say that those policies and procedures will be adhered to, and what happens when there may be instances of things going wrong. So let me stop there, leave you with that, those sources of additional information, and pass it on to Mina for co-financing.
Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. In this next short presentation, we'll have a quick overview of GEF's approach on co-financing. Earlier during this seminar, we've heard that since the GEF's beginning, the increment or additional cost reasoning has been the fundamental operational principle of the GEF. We've also heard that the current GEF 7 strategy is focused around catalyzing transformational change to address the drivers of environmental degradation. Yesterday, GEF's CEO, in his opening remarks, talked about how GEF is in need to maximize its impact by investing the scarce resources in a way that leverages partnerships and funding. Because no matter how much funds the GEF and resources GEF has, it will never be able to tackle the global environmental issues alone. So how is this all related to co-financing? Next slide. Well, the co-financing at the GEF is broadly defined as financing that is additional to GEF project financing and that supports the implementation of GEF-financed projects and the achievements of its objectives. So when we talk about GEF's impact, measured through the core indicators on global environmental benefits, co-financing supports long-lasting and large-scale global environment benefits. For example, GEF resources can be used to demonstrate innovation, and then co-finance leverages additional resources for implementation and scaling up. And then when GEF reports on its impact and results, these are fully inclusive of the full project financing, including the co-financing. So co-financing allows us to deliver bigger impact and create more sustainability. Co-financing is also a sign of country ownership, helping to enhance the impact of GEF programming. And more broadly, the GEF uses the scarce financial resources where they can be most helpful to all stakeholders: governments, businesses, communities, researchers, and beneficiaries. It is an essential tool for partnerships. Next one. So what is GEF co-financing? Co-financing can come in a variety of sources and types. And for the GEF reporting purposes, we have identified 7 different sources ranging from GEF agencies, donor agencies, to government, CSOs, private sector, and beneficiaries. And co-financing can be in grants, loans, equity investments, guarantees, in-kind, public investments, and others. In GEF 7, we have introduced a new concept of investment mobilized, with the objective to provide more candid information on the resources mobilized by GEF financing. Investment mobilized is broadly defined as a subset of co-financing that is not recurrent expenditure. But agencies can use their own definitions and approaches to identify investment mobilized. We collect this information and ask agencies to provide those definitions during the project preparation. Next slide. So the key question, how much co-financing? Co-financing is required for all GEF projects and programs, independent of their size. And it's strongly encouraged for GEF's enabling activities. On an exceptional basis, in response to an emergency or other unforeseen circumstance, agencies may propose projects without co-financing. All projects need to provide this information at the project concept. We ask for indicative information on co-financing, and at the CEO endorsement, this indicative information is confirmed through co-financing letters or other legal documents providing confirmation of the type and amount of co-financing. And during the project implementation, agencies provide information on the materialized co-financing through their midterm reviews and terminal evaluations. But there is no minimum threshold or specific type of specific limits for specific type or sources of co-financing. At the GEF Secretariat, we acknowledge that different focal areas in different countries by different agencies and different approaches can attract different levels of co-financing. We have, and the countries with the capacity to do so are encouraged to seek higher levels of co-financing and investment mobilized. However, in consultation with our donors for the GEF 7, we have agreed to reach a co-financing ratio of at least 7:1 at the portfolio level. And so far, we are on track to meet that ambition. Current level of co-financing is $7 to $8 for each GEF dollar. Also, we have a separate ambition level for upper middle income countries and high income countries that are not small island developing states, where we expect investment mobilized ratio of at least 5:1. But as I said, the most important takeaway is that this information that you provide through project concept notes and CEO endorsements is reviewed by the GEF Secretariat. We provide comments and recommendations, but there's no minimum threshold that you should aim at when thinking about your project proposals. And this final slide provides more details on the policy on co-financing that includes the definitions, sources, and other material, including in the guidelines.
Fantastic, Mina, thanks very much. I think we have one more session here before we go to our virtual coffee. Paula, if I'm right about
yes,
that.
we have
yeah.
Cyril coming on the monitoring policy. We have several questions that are coming in. So let's go with Cyril, see where we are, and let's address maybe a few questions before the virtual coffee so that people don't feel that we forget about them. And then we'll resume, okay?
All right, thank you, Paola.
Thank you, Cyril.
So we already spoke about taking data seriously to reach the project objective on time and with quality. And if there's one thing I'll insist on today is that there is no better opportunity to get this right, to monitor progress right, than when preparing a new project. And you'll see why in a minute. So we'll now look at the how projects monitor progress on the ground. And let's start by looking at what is monitoring. Put it simply, it's about collecting, reporting, and analyzing data around specific indicators. And it's about doing it in a continuous and systematic fashion during implementation. And doing this right starts when? It starts during project design and preparation. It's at design that you set the arrangements to provide evidence on project progress, to ensure that project financing is helping to reach the expected results. And here I'll present the monitoring policy requirements along the project milestone, from preparation to implementation and completion. And the idea is that monitoring data should help you improve implementation, but also improve the design of new projects. So let's start from the beginning. The PIF, or project identification stage, is when you focus on establishing the logic of the project. You identify the problems to overcome, the building blocks to reach the project objective. It's when you define the outcomes that contribute to this objective and the output to achieve these outcomes. And next is the CO endorsement stage. This is when you get the green light to start implementation. And a green light, the endorsement, is not a victory. It's when everything begins. And to get this right, each project must first prepare a full-fledged project M&E framework. What it includes is a project results framework with baselines and targets for each indicator. But a results framework doesn't tell you much, again, about monitoring. That's why projects also prepare a monitoring and evaluation plan. In concrete terms, this means articulating the plans to collect data, the timeline to monitor those activities, and having a budget that sets the context for those activities. And once under implementation, and I've seen questions relating to that in the chat, projects provide every year a project implementation report. This provides an update on implementation progress, disbursement, and planned milestones. And we know each agency measures a lot more at project level than our requirements. But the information we collect here in the implementation report already gives a strong sense of how a project is doing. It's what we use to design the tools that we talked about yesterday. And all this is supported also by qualitative data. Then moving on at midterm, projects undertake this time a complete stock taking of progress made since implementation starts. And I cannot emphasize enough how this report is important. It's your opportunity to find ways to fix and improve further implementation. It's also when you provide a first update on the achievement of core indicators and on how much of the co-financing that you were expecting to take place actually materialized by the midterm stage. And then jumping ahead toward the completion of projects, again, the terminal evaluation takes, like the MTR, a retrospective timeframe, but this time it looks at the full project life cycle. And the terminal evaluation is also an instrumental tool for our independent evaluation office. And some colleagues from the evaluation office will share more about this with you in the coming sessions. So what I just showed right now is valid for, let's say, 90% of our projects. But there are different types of projects that require different monitoring requirements. First, the requirements are lower for enabling activities. This is because enabling activities mainly aim to prepare to prepare reports to conventions. And second, with programs. A key requirement for program is that they must prepare a theory of change and a results framework that articulates the impact reached collectively by all child projects, and also prepare annual reports during implementation. And finally, the SGP, the small grant programs, produces each year a consolidated report on the hundreds of grants that it implements with community-based organizations and the civil society. So as I close this presentation, let me just highlight that project monitoring is a basis to inform the partnership and project stakeholders, to inform them on the progress made with reliable and credible data. But let me be clear, accountability is not the end that we are looking after here. The data should be used to better manage projects and to make the right decisions to help invest in new projects. And that's the whole meaning of this presentation. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cyril. Over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cyril. And thanks to all the last set of presenters. Now what I would like us to do, we've been fielding some questions as we go along, but I think it's a good time for a virtual coffee, which we have planned. And maybe we could take the slide off the screen so we can have the full screen. I hope folks can hear me out there. The first part of the virtual coffee that I would like to do today is I would just love to, people can start turning on their videos. I would especially like to ask the team behind the scenes. These are the ones behind the curtain here in the GEF Secretariat also. I want to take this moment to introduce them. I have, if you could all, let me see if I can get everybody. Christina, Ted, Regine, Nicolas, Sojang, Mikael, Olga, Glynis. I hope, please all turn on your screens. I see you coming on. I see everybody. And if the interpreters are there, can I also, this is very unorthodox. I'm not sure. You don't need to come on if you don't want to, but the interpreters too. So if we could all just give a big, maybe virtual round of applause, you know, you can turn on your microphones to everybody behind the scenes who's doing all this amazing work. Thank you also, William, for organizing the questions and everyone. Okay, so now let's stretch. Let's give ourselves a minute. I encourage everyone to please turn on your microphones if you would like to. We'd love to hear, you know, we're talking about where we are, where we're going. Now let's actually hear where we are. Please say hello. We can also have some silence. I'm seeing on the chat. Oh, it looks like the host is, we have to allow everyone to unmute themselves. So is
yes,
everyone?
just one. Yes, sorry. Yes, 1 second, please. Yes.
All right, so let's do that, and we'll slow down the pace here.
Yeah. Okay.
Is anybody out there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Possible. Right.
Hi all, good afternoon from Rome. Thank you for all your presentations, very well received and very useful. Thank you.
Hello from Afghanistan. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
I'm Kona Koli. I'm from Liberia. Thank you for all your presentation. I have been requesting for this webinar for some time now. I really appreciate the organizer of this webinar. Susan, I say hi. How you doing? Bye-bye.
Thank you, Liberia.
Okay.
Great presentations. Guillermo Harris from Argentina, WCS. Thank you very much. Very good.
Thank you, Argentina. It's a pleasure to have you.
My name is Andrei. Hello. I'm from Ukraine. Thank you for your presentation and for your seminars. It's very interesting for us. Thank you.
Будь ласка.
Thank you from Nigeria. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigeria. Thank you, Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you from Burkina Faso. Thanks for the work well done. We have learned a lot.
You're most welcome across the waters. Thank you.
I am from Indonesia. Thank you for the great presentation.
And I don't go into details because I try to look into one, without doing anything else, just listening, but the level of details is.
Thank you so much. I see someone raised their hand. Eugene, you have raised your hand. And Kasahun, I see you waving.
Thank you so much from Ethiopia for your nice presentation.
But I don't think the next, already the co-financing, the monitoring, for instance, yes,
Thank you for the presentation.
it's nice to hear, but
Brazilian
I'm
and
not going to take
good morning, bom dia.
Bom dia, where is that from, Brazil?
Bom
Yes.
I guess so.
Bom dia.
Yeah, from IEGB from Brazil as well. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for joining so early. We really appreciate it. The early birds and the late birds too. It's so nice to have everyone.
Hi, Peter. It's a very well organized event and very fruitful one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you all being here. I see 3 participants have raised their hand. So if you raise your hand, you have a special right to come in right now. Please do so. I don't know who it is.
Thank you, everyone. This is Eugene from Nairobi. I'm originally from Kenya, but I'm in Uganda right now. Thank you for the presentation.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to say that it's been super useful, even for some of us that, we think that we know already all the things about GEF, but there is always something new that we can learn and do better. So thank you for organizing this. I think it's very informative, and I would like to have the recordings of these meetings so we can share even with more colleagues that were not able to join the meeting. Oh, this is Luzmila from UNDP. Okay,
Very good. Thank you. Sure. And we will have the recordings. The team behind the scenes will help us see them. I think the only one that knows more about the GEF than the GEF is William. So the rest of us are learning all along the way.
Yes. Hello.
Hello.
Peter. Yes. I'm Edward Okoto Moya. I work with East African Development Bank. The GEF introduction seminar has been an eye-opener to us, and we are looking forward to gaining accreditation with GEF. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. We're so glad you're here.
Hello.
Hello, Anne.
Yeah, I'm Anne from Kenya. Thank you very much. The seminar has been very educative and eye-opening. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming in on that too. I don't know if you know Susan. We have someone in our secretariat from Kenya also.
Okay, good. Thank you, Rita, for a great presentation. I learned a lot from the discussion and the presentation, and build my better understanding on GEF.
Bonjour.
Thank you very much, Wayan.
Bonjour, c'est Abi du bureau de l'ONUDI à Bamako, au Mali.
Voilà. Oui.
Merci beaucoup pour toutes ces informations très utiles que nous avons reçues à travers les différentes présentations.
Excellent.
Ça nous a permis d'approfondir beaucoup nos connaissances par rapport au fonds GEF. Merci encore une fois.
Merci, Abi. Je vous en prie. Merci beaucoup. Merci. Vola, I think you wanted to come. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And Habi is also from UNIDO. I'm from UNIDO, Madagascar. So just to continue, thank you very much for this insightful sharing. And now I personally understand lots of things. So thank you very much. And looking forward to a better cooperation note that I understand well. Thank you. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Vola. I see a couple of hands. Usupov Marat. Yeah.
Hello, I am from Kyrgyzstan, UNIDA also, and it is very educational, and I think a lot of my colleagues are watching and I see them, and thank you very much. I think it should be done earlier, but now I think it should be a regular practice to do it online. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you very much. Let me go next. I see ACG with your hand up. Are you out there? I don't know if I'm properly recognizing you. Yes.
Oui, bonjour à tous. Hello,
Hello.
I'm Fatma from ACG, from Tunisia. I would like to thank you for this day, for all this presentation. I'm happy to be with you, and we will continue with you tomorrow. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Hein? Merci. Eugene, I see your hand raised. Are you there? And Amidou, I see also you.
Yeah, bonjour tout le monde depuis le Mali.
Bonjour.
Merci pour la qualité des présentations. J'avoue qu'elles vont vraiment nous aider dans beaucoup de choses. Et merci pour tout l'effort.
Excellent. Merci beaucoup. Je suis content. Merci. Merci. I see, let's see, Aneska. No, let's see. Yes, please.
Anahit Simonian, UNIDO country representative. I just want to second all my colleagues thanking for this organization. I just want to say that I have institutional memory. Starting from late 90s, I was GEF focal point, also in the
Wow,
UNDP
okay.
and also UNIDO. And now I feel also the development and the progress and the changes. And it was very interesting to see reformation within the GEF policy and the procedures and the country's policies as well. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Anahit. Welcome back. It's so nice to have you back. Thank you for saying that. I see Nining and Gudi, IDN. I think you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'm from Indonesia. My name is Nining. Thank you for arranging this meeting so I can learn a lot from this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much. Okay, thanks very much to all. Thank you for turning on your videos. I hope we had a chance to stretch a little bit during this coffee break. We're going through a lot of materials about the GEF, about the way to design and implement projects. The last segment we just had was on the first stretch of policies. Jonathan helped us with our fiduciary policies, which is safeguarding the funds and using the money well. This is, by the way, a big issue and priority topic at GEF Council. A lot's going on with it, and so it's very important to our collective work. Mina, thank you so much for the presentation on co-financing, which is, among other things, about amplifying our impact, having a larger partnership, greater contributions from others, and what it actually is. And then the last section we just had from, I think it was Cyril, on our monitoring work, especially at the portfolio level monitoring, you know, what we follow, how we're doing it, what we're trying to achieve. And every year, as I think Cyril mentioned, in December council or the end of the year council, we put together what's going on in the portfolio, present it to council, and it's not only to know what's going on, but also to help us do better. I mean, there's a big why behind all of these things. The co-financing gives us more resources, it gets more engagement, the fiduciary standards make everything run smoothly and well and are appreciated by the donors as well. And the monitoring is to help us keep improving because we have a big mission out there. All of these things fit together with the larger picture, which is what we're trying to achieve in the GEF, which is global environmental benefits for people and nature working together, and the maximum impact we can for the investments that we receive, working together as a partnership. So let us return back to the session. The session is scheduled to go until 10:30. I have it now scheduled as 10:15. So if it is all right, I think we could probably do one more session. although I think let me check with Paola, because we also
Peter,
had some questions.
Yes, we have some really good questions that I wouldn't want to leave. We're going to have breakout rooms tomorrow in different languages where all these questions will be addressed also in the context of your direct experience. But I would like to address some questions now because otherwise we will lose the momentum.
Yes, very good. In fact, I had neglected to mention that. It was on my mind. So thank you, Paola. Let us go for the questions now. And if we run to 10:30, then we can just shift we have time built in tomorrow morning for the last group. So Paola, please.
Exactly. So there are some questions on the monitoring policy from Jane that I would like maybe Cyril to address, and Mina, who is also, in addition to be our co-financing specialist, she's also our M&E project review specialist. Why should we include the theory of change in the PIF? So this is a very good question, and I would like Cyril and Mina to cover this, please.
Yeah, briefly, theories of change are required for program framework documents, and they're left at the decision of each agency at PIF stage. There are, however, in the PIF, the key elements that help to shape theories of change. There's an analysis of problem. There are discussion about the assumption and the hypothesis and scenarios that have gone into it. And importantly, there's a discussion of risk as well, all of which help you define the trajectory of implementation that you will be taking to reach the project objective. So that's the overarching way the project templates deal with this topic. Mina, would you like to add to this?
No, I would say that in the PIF template, we have the table B. So it already provides you provides us with the opportunity to review how the outputs and outcomes address the barriers. So the theory of change is just to provide, at this point, at the concept stage, additional information on the approach that the project will take. So it is strongly recommended from our side.
Thank you, Mina. We also have questions regarding the co-financing, since we're with you now, and whether there are any transformational change from co-financing. In fact, Mina wrote a council document that is published in our website about the experience with the co-financing policy so far. And let's remind ourselves that our GEBL, Global Environmental Benefits, are our ambitious targets, count on both GEF funding and co-financing. So co-financing is encouraged, it is not an obligation, and it is extremely important to help achieve the goals. There are other questions on co-financing, Mina, if you would like to address, for example, on how we measure it concretely and what is the impact that we can observe.
Well, as I mentioned in the presentation, really, we start at the concept stage asking for the indicative information and then commitments at the CO endorsement through co-financing letters and or some legal documentation from the co-financing entity. And this for us is a proof that the co-financier is ownership and part of the project part of the project approach in general. With regards to how it's impact, Paola already mentioned that our targets for the GEF 7 cycle on global environmental indicators, those targets include the GEF financing and co-financing. So we set our targets with the co-financing in mind. And whether this is leading to transformational change, this is a very tricky question on first how we measure transformational change, but certainly the scale is only possible if we are able to leverage investments and a larger level of co-financing where it is feasible. So we don't have to show yet from the GEF 6 or GEF 7 cycle. Of course, these are just still under implementation if the transformational change has really been taken place and if the co-financing has been the attributing factor. But we know that it's only possible with co-financing.
Thank you, Mina. There is a question on monitoring from Fanny in Spanish in the chat. Is it possible for the GEF to provide technical support to follow the monitoring in each project and in particularly on the indicators? So this is again for you and Henry as well.
Well, first of all, the Secretariat is always available to help and assist in any way we can. So please do reach out to us if you'd like to. Second, the GEF has a strength the fact that it provides space and budget for monitoring and evaluation activities. And if you feel there's a strong need to strengthen the monitoring and evaluation capacity of your project, well, this can be taken care of at the design stage and built into your budget.
Thank you. I think this is quite exhaustive. We have several questions on PIRs that were not addressed simply because they're very specific, but maybe we can address them because it seems like we are not covering PIRs. Maybe Harry, you can tell us what the GEFSEC does with the PIRs. That's a very good question.
No, but I'm sorry, Paula, but I think that I deferred that to the monitoring and evaluation.
Yes, let's go back to Cyril and Mina.
Yeah,
I wanted some alternance here, but back to Cyril and Mina. Yeah.
No, we do a lot of stuff. We do everything we presented on yesterday during the first session. That's how we are able to prepare the monitoring tools that we have. That's how we are able to report on project progress at the portfolio level in the monitoring report every year. Please read it. Please read the monitoring report. The 100% of the data is extracted from it. And we've added also the need to add qualitative analysis in your PIRs now. And this data we also use. We use this data to provide more qualitative reporting. And last year we looked into the integrated approach programs and we extracted this data and the information that you shared to get a sense of how IAPs are doing. So yes, we use the data and we use it in every way we can.
Thank you very much, Cyril. I think we have covered quite a bit of questions. We have the next segment. What I suggest we do is, sorry, no, there is another question also from Fanny that just came in. How does GEF report on results to conventions at national, regional, and global level?
Well, we prepared those convention reports on whether it's on CPD or UNCCD and UNFCCC. Our colleagues from the programming team can probably tell some details, but those reports are actually present as a council documents are available on our website, but they include results, targeted estimated results, achieved results, and different other aspects such as co-financing and how much has been programmed in each area of focal programming area.
Yeah, you also have Chiz will be talking about relations with conventions and the secretariats on Thursday, so you can ask a bit more at that time too.
Excellent, thank you, William. I suggest we cover the first presentation in the next segment, which is about the stakeholder engagement, because there were questions already that came up in the chat. And then we leave the last three on gender equality and guidelines, environment and social safeguards, and knowledge management requirements with the Kaleo tool to the start of tomorrow morning, followed by the breakout rooms for more questions, so that we address the stakeholder engagement, which is an extremely important requirement for us. And let me ask Pilar Barrera Rey to go with this presentation. particularly colleagues from CSOs would know Pilar very well.
Thank you, Paula, and good morning, good afternoon, and evening to all of you. My name is Pilar Barrera Rey. I'm the Senior Operations Officer.
Christina, sorry, we now need to go back and mute those who are not present.
Yes, I just unmuted. Hold on just a second, please.
Okay, I'll wait. I think it's good.
Yes, we're good.
Thank you, Christina. As I was saying, my name is Pilar Barrera Rey. I'm Senior Operations Officer at the GEF Secretariat, where I coordinate stakeholder engagement, particularly with civil society organizations, like Paula said. I'm also the program manager for the GEF Small Grants Program. It's really a pleasure to be here and see so many good colleagues and friends. I'm going to talk to you about why and how we engage with stakeholders in GEF's finance activities. Actually, since the very beginning of the GEF, the institution has recognized the importance of open and transparent engagement of stakeholders in its operations. The GEF's approach to stakeholder engagement is actually explicit in the instrument, in the GEF instrument, which, as you know, is considered like the bylaws or the statutes of the GEF. The Article 5 states that GEF finance activity projects will provide for full disclosure of non-confidential information and consultation with and participation of major groups and local communities throughout the project cycle. This was indeed a very progressive statement for the times and even for today. Next slide, please, Nico. So why do we engage with stakeholders? Why does it matter? Well, effective stakeholder engagement is critical to the success of any GEF finance activity. It is critical to the performance and the impact because it enhances country ownership and also accountability. In addition, early engagement with stakeholders allows the identification of the social and economic needs of people who will be affected by the program or project, and also allows us to identify measures to address those needs. Engaging stakeholders can also bring about new partnerships and strengthen also existing ones that are relevant for the project or program in question. And engaging with a wide range of stakeholders can also help identify different skills and experiences that may be brought to bear in the design and implementation of the project. Here, as you can see, is not an exhaustive, the previous one, an exhaustive list, but this provides some ideas of why stakeholder engagement is necessary. Next slide, Nico, please. So GEF's approach to stakeholder engagement has evolved throughout the years. The GEF has had a number of policies and guidelines that address the issue of stakeholder engagement and also has provided minimum requirements and standards related to stakeholder engagement. You will hear more about other current policies and guidelines in tomorrow's session, such as the gender equality and the environmental and social safeguards policy. In this session, I would like to briefly talk to you about the updated policy on stakeholder engagement, which was approved by Council and became effective in July of 2018. The updated policy on stakeholder engagement is founded on 4 main principles that really encompass values such as inclusion, transparency, accountability, responsiveness, balance and fair representation, long-term commitment, and timely and appropriate access to information. These principles really set a clear intent for the policy, whose objective is to promote the inclusive and meaningful participation of stakeholders in the GEF's governance and operations in support of the GEF's mission. One thing I wanted to say, and if this was asked by actually Sojourn in the quiz, the policy applies to all activities, irrespective of the level of risk. Next slide, please, Nico. So the new policy establishes minimum requirements for agencies, for their policies and procedures, and also their capabilities related to stakeholder engagement throughout the whole program and project cycle, from design up to monitoring and reporting. Here you can see the requirements at entry level and CEO endorsement and reporting, but in the next slide, I will talk a bit more about this in detail. Next slide, please, Nico. So based on those requirements throughout the project cycle that are, for agencies, agencies, governments, and CSOs, and also indigenous peoples and local communities who are preparing or participating in design and implementation of projects maybe should know and take into account that there are some key things that really have to be considered. At entry level, for example, was the project during the design phase, or even the identification phase, was it consulted with stakeholders and affected people? Were those consultations inclusive and gender balanced? Was, for example, free, prior, and informed consent applied in cases where the indigenous peoples and local communities may be affected by the project or program? These are really things to take into consideration when identifying and designing a project. Who are those stakeholders? What are their interests? What are their future roles? How do you envisage the roles of these stakeholders in the future? At CEO endorsement, there's a very important and firm requirement, which is the project has to include a comprehensive stakeholder engagement plan. And at a minimum, this plan should include stakeholders who will be engaged or have been engaged so far. What are the means for engaging them? What's going to be the dissemination of information? What are the roles or responsibilities of stakeholders? What are the resource requirements to really ensure that stakeholders are engaged? And what is the timing of that engagement? In addition to this, the policy also issued guidelines. The Secretariat, issued the guidelines for the implementation of the policy on stakeholder engagement. And these guidelines provide guidance and information on how to implement the policy, but it also includes best practices and other tools that can be used to conduct meaningful stakeholder engagement throughout the GEF program and project cycle. And here you have a link to those guidelines. Final slide, please. Well, I wanted to leave you maybe with this screenshot of actually our scorecard that we present to Council, where we report on engagement of stakeholders, particularly civil society, private sector, and indigenous people and local communities, both at the consultation level of the project, and also about the future engagement of these stakeholders throughout the program and the project. Here you can see the percentages of projects that went to the December work program that consulted with indigenous peoples, with civil society, or with private sector, and also the percentages that reported some role for these stakeholders. Thank you, that's all for now, and I can maybe take some questions, Paula.
Excellent, thank you. This was very clear, Pilar. We have some questions in the chat. The first is if it's mandatory to consult stakeholders at PIF level. I think you covered this, but you can maybe address it.
Yes, I can answer that. It is important to engage stakeholders at the early stage. So during the design of the PIF, it is important to consult with the affected people. So yes.
And it is important also to provide evidence of it because we want to make sure that beneficiaries are fully involved.
Right, yes, yeah. During the PIF, actually, the agency has to describe the consultations, whom they consulted with, yeah, a description of the consultation that took place. So yes, indeed, provide evidence.
There is an interesting question here from Elias on, since the GEF focuses on global environmental benefits, how can we best design project interventions for directing socioeconomic benefits to primary stakeholders? And do such benefits play a crucial role while approving projects? Thanks for this really good question.
This is a very good question, actually. And because the mission of the GEF is really to contribute to global environmental benefits, or all our core indicators are really based on these global environmental benefits. However, we do have one indicator that talks about beneficiaries, you know, the amount of beneficiaries. Also, we have indicators on gender equality. So that is another aspect of the social indicators. And we do also, again, report on stakeholder engagement. So in this sense, these are some social indicators, but we are really a global environment facility. So we really have the mostly indicators in terms of global environment.
Thank you. And we also have a question to see if we have participation of CSOs and private sector as mandatory. And I think here, since you're our expert, it's important to clarify also what we mean by CSO, right?
So yeah, civil society organization covers indigenous peoples, women's groups, youth, all non-state actors basically, and also including private sector. This is not mandatory. It's not mandatory to include CSOs or private sector or any other stakeholder in the design or of the project. What is mandatory is the consultations, and also to kind of identify those stakeholders that are going to be affected by the project. So if there's civil society that are affected by the project, not only they be consulted, but they should also participate in the design of the project, and also they should have a role in that project. So it cannot be mandatory from top down, but it depends on the project as well. If they're really stakeholders, they should be included, of course, according to our stakeholder engagement policy.
Let me ask William if you're receiving any questions by email.
Sorry, there is a question here about the, sorry, William, perdóname. There's one on the NGI. Yes, it applies to all projects. So it also applies to those that address blended finance. That CEO endorsement, a stakeholder engagement plan has to be provided. The policy applies to all GEF finance activities, irrespective of the type.
So the questions are coming in on the chat, so you can all see them there.
There is a question on the SGP.
Can't see it.
Historically, UNDP was implementing agency for SGP. Is there a change in this policy in regard to other implementing agency?
So tomorrow we're going to be talking actually about the small grants program. I would like to address that question maybe when we talk about the small grant program, but maybe just for now, it's not a policy. It's not a policy that the implementing agency has to be UNDP. So far in the past 28 years, it has been SGP, UNDP, the implementing agency, but there's no policy to that regard. But I will address more the CP tomorrow, and also CSO engagement, civil society engagement. These two areas will be addressed tomorrow.
Very good. Thank you very much, Pilar. I think we have reached a little bit sort of the end of today's session. Questions keep coming. Are there ways to ensuring meaningful participation? This is about sharing experience. What I suggest we do here, Pilar, if you want, you can address this one, but we're going to have breakout rooms tomorrow precisely to share experience among participants and ask case-specific questions in different languages. We're going to have Spanish and French in addition to English. So I don't know, Pilar, if you want to cover this one, and then we can maybe close and continue tomorrow with the other sessions and the breakout rooms.
No, very briefly, and I hope Guillermo joins the Spanish-speaking team tomorrow, so we can talk more about this, Guillermo. But it is an important question. Is it only a matter about ticking the box? You know, CSOs were consulted. No, it is not only about ticking the box. And the agencies have also their own very strict policies and requirements and procedures in terms of stakeholder engagement. So they're committed to really having meaningful participation, but glad to talk to you more about this tomorrow, Guillermo.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Pilar. And thanks for this presentation. So we're going to cover more of the safeguards, gender, and we're going to close with knowledge management requirements and nice videos about our experiences tomorrow morning. I suggest we take advantage of the fact that people are more numerous when we start, and then we're going to go into the breakout rooms. So for today, I would like to thank everyone for participating so actively in this really important hands-on session. Back to Peter to guide us through closing for today, and then I look forward to continuing with this session resuming tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yes,
Paula, may I just, sorry, Peter, may I just interject for 1 second? Just wanted to make an announcement to our participants. This is Yasmin Biro, GEF Knowledge and Learning Coordinator. The presentation on knowledge and learning has been postponed to tomorrow, but you will have received an email in your inboxes. All the registered participants have received an invitation to register in our Kaleo online Ask the Expert tool. You should have received it within the last half hour. If not in the next half hour, you will get it in your inbox. So I would just request that if you have a chance, please go to the link that's in the invitation. It can also be in your junk box, so please check your junk boxes as well as your regular inboxes. And please go there and see if you can register into our Kaleo Ask the Expert online knowledge base. We will go over it tomorrow and explain to you what it's all about and how to use it, etc. But it's one of our key tools for asking questions and learning about the GEF. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. If you can register, that'd be fantastic. And if you have any questions, any issues registering, please also drop us a note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yasmin, for the heads up. And on that, we'll be looking forward to that tomorrow. Thank you so much, Paula and Pilar, especially for this last presentation. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all the good questions. This has launched us into the last segment of this session that we're in now, which is at the heart of our programming and policy work of how to design and implement projects. What Pilar is talking about, stakeholder engagement, as she mentioned, it's really a cornerstone feature of the GEF and the GEF's work. It's about bringing in all the voices and the experience and expertise of all the stakeholders to the GEF, and also pushing us to do more. That's another part of the importance of this engagement. And as she mentioned, it applies at all phases of the project cycle. And thanks for the questions about, stakeholder engagement upstream at the PIP stage. Pilar put on the graphic, about what happens at the different stages in terms of stakeholder engagement. It made me think back to the beginning of our session and Henry's car. Maybe it's an electric car, a solar car, I'm not sure, but the car that shows the journey that we're on. And I think the stakeholder engagement is part of the idea that everyone is on this journey. We want by GEF policy, which express the values of the partnership, to be inclusive and to engage with the stakeholders and the civil society as critical to the intrinsic importance of public participation, which is embedded in the instrument, and also to getting us to better projects, to country ownerships and the other thing, to country ownership and the things that Pilar spoke about. So thanks very much for that. Thanks to everyone for staying a few minutes on. We're just a little bit after time. We're grateful that you stayed up, especially in the late evenings. Let us close for the day, and we will see you all at the same time tomorrow morning. If you'd like to turn on, now turn on your videos to wave, at least, well, if you'd like to wave goodbye, as you might know, Christina is at some point going to pull the plug on us. So we're going to disappear pretty soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice rest of the day and a nice evening. Farewell.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great seminar. Thanks.
Bye. See you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the team.
Gracias. Gracias a todos.
Bye.
No, gracias. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Gracias a todos. Chao, chao. Saludos.
Where is Christina? Hi, Christina.
Who is looking for me? Who is looking for me?
Yanni.
Where are you, Yanni? I cannot see you.
Yeah, here I am.
Hi.
Now we see you, Yanni.
Christina.
Yes, Yanni.
Oh my goodness. I'm happy now I see your face.
She's
I'm
behind
here.
the curtain. I'm sorry.
I'm always here. I'm always here.
Yeah, I know.
I like your background. I like your background.
Yeah. Yeah. Bye, Peter. Bye, all. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for being here.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Okay, Christina, whenever you want, you may pull the plug. Bye, everybody.